beautiful Beirut campus, or halfway across the world, we invite you to join AUB as we celebrate our 150th anniversary. Founded during the Ottoman Empire, the American University of Beirut has continued to make a major impact for generations. We make that impact in many ways. Our physicians heal the region's sickest patients. Our engineers have built much of the Arab world. Our School of Business continues to create innovative and ethical solutions to some major challenges, while our faculties of agriculture and food sciences and health sciences address some of the region's most turbulent areas and most challenging problems. Our School of Arts and Sciences is the beating heart of Arab liberal thought and innovation. For all the history we've made in 150 years, the next 150 years stand to be just as pivotal. The big question is, what comes next? So we ask you, how do you make history? How can you live a meaningful AUB life?
Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the first event of Dr. Fadl Khouri's inauguration program. The symposium on AUB's defining moments is in 3 parts. The first part is reflective and is based on personal storytelling that provides an insight into the history and legacy of AUB in the last 50 years. The second part includes our younger faculty members and students. Each will speak for a few minutes about one issue that they would like to share with you. At 12:30, we will all have lunch downstairs in West Hall Common Room. And at 3 p.m. sharp, the inauguration of Dr. Fadl Khouri as the 16th president of AUB will start at Assembly Hall. We consider that his inauguration speech, in which he will be presenting his vision for the future, is the third and last part of the symposium. As you will have the chance to notice, we wanted to include in the symposium the various components of AUB, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and even members of the Board of Trustees represented by Dr. Philip Khouri. Before I leave the stage, I would like to thank the following people who graciously volunteered, and they stress volunteered, a lot of their time, energy, and creativity to make the symposium a little different. First and foremost, alumna Raghda Jaber, graduate of AUB's architecture department in 1983, who helped to the minutest details with both the conception and execution. She is also a speaker in the symposium. Tony Oiry, who is responsible for the projection behind me. He gave us also a lot of his time and expertise. He's a talented filmmaker and an instructor in our media studies program. Sahar Asaf, who's not here today, she's professor of theater at AUB and the brilliant theater director and actor. Our light engineer, undergraduate student in business and theater, Jad Batlouni. I also want to thank Jennifer Muller and Madonna El-Jindi from the Office of Advancement and Najla Sha'ar from the Office of the Provost. Thank you all for your diligence and amiability. I also would like to thank the director of Télé Liban, Dr. Talal Maqdisi, for graciously opening the valuable archives of Télé Liban to our team. And last but not least, I want to thank all the speakers in the symposium. Thank you. Before proceeding, I would like to remind you and urge you and plead with you to place your mobile on silent mode. And now I would like to invite my teacher, CS teacher, Mr. Peter Shbai'a, and Mr. David Kourani to join me on the stage.
I get to start speaking at this wonderful occasion. I'm very privileged, and I am very, very happy also for the primary reason for all this that's taking place. But I am supposed to, within a few minutes, tell you something about the art scene at AUB in the 50s and the 60s. And I think there's something very important I'm going to try to get across to you in a slideshow, but let me tell you the thesis statement at the beginning, which is that before AUB did what it did in those days, art in Lebanon was made in basically one way and produced mostly portraits, either society or religious, and some landscapes, painted in the normal, traditional way. And then along came what happened in AUB. But I'll start here now with a picture by Khalil Salibi, who came from his studies in the States and Europe. He studied alongside John Singer Sargent, and he saw the Impressionists. He came with his American wife here, and he liked the scene so much that he set up his studio just a few meters away at the end of Sadat Street, which became the Salibi Art Center, and it influenced many artists in the region. And as you see here, he painted College Hall. But I'll get back to him in a minute. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, in 1954, President Stephen Penrose saw the need for art classes on campus. There was a demand. Already 2 students had turned into artists, and they were well known. They were Amr al-Ansi and Farrouj. Mustafa, thank you. Yes, I'm being helped by a lot of old friends in the audience. Thank you very much. Bye. Okay, anyway, so art classes were started. He had drafted a very talented lady named Mariette Charlton to begin them, and she set up studios and formed a department. They gave classes as electives, and she was accompanied by 2 more people, Margot Hoff and her husband, George Buer, who gave brilliant lectures in art. And next slide. That's George Buer next to Mariette Charlton discussing things. I don't know exactly what, but still. Next. At the end of the first year, first or second year, they had their first student art show in the art gallery in Jaffet Library, which was very popular, very successful. Many people came, including our own, Lebanon's own First Lady. You can see her there on the right. On your right, yes, that's right. That's her, Zelfa Shamroun, looking at the exhibition. Next. And what kind of art were they seeing? Well, here's a painting by Mariette Charlton, very different from your normal landscape type of art that had been painted up till that time. And portraits turned into that by George Buer. Again, very different, but also in touch with what was going on in Europe at the time. Next. Here, Mariette Charlton took the students outside for their classes to teach them painting from nature, but, and also go back. I may mention that my older sister was in that class, and she got me at a tender age to meet Mariette Charlton and listen. Next. Interesting guests. Alexander Calder, famous for his mobiles at that time, came, and newspaper coverage was great. That also brought attention to us. Next. That he set up an exhibition. He was here really to create a big mobile for the Pan American office downtown, but he also was kind enough to come give some lectures at AUB and an exhibition. That's some of his work. Next. But he wasn't the only one who promoted art. The First Lady, Zelfa Shamroun, she was so interested and so taken by the scene here that she came and gave a lot of time, including posing for the art class. That's them drawing her. Also, she posed for the adult seminar that was set up for just any adults who were in the community who were interested in art. And so she really got around and encouraged us, which meant that all the newspapers came along and gave us coverage as well. Next. There's a newspaper coverage. The First Lady poses for art students. Go on next. There's Margot Hoff. You hadn't had a picture of her, but she gave an exhibition. She's talking to the young Aida Marini, who later became a successful artist. But I would also have you notice the art that's on the walls. Look at that. That's very different from what had been going on in Lebanon before. So they were in the business of opening everybody's eyes to new forms of art. Next. Also, Marriott Charlton instituted seminars for children in art. I believe this was a great piece of foresight. She was looking to developing tastes in art for the future. And I was part of that class. I recognize all my classmates, although I'm not in that picture myself. There she is, demonstrating something about drawing. Next. And there is Madame Shamroun coming in and also overseeing the art classes. Had I time, I would have told you something about a dialogue that happened between me and her, but let's go on. A very important man who came in, whom many of you know, was Arthur Frick. He came in 1956, and he was responsible for formulating the degree program, a BA in studio arts. And not only that, but he had an encyclopedic knowledge of all kinds of styles, art that was going on. And so he was invited, for example, to be judge in many art exhibits, and he was simply a reference figure. But he was a great painter as well, could paint in many, many styles, but I'll give you only one example. Next. His life-size portrait of his daughter, Nola Frick Gargour. This is here in Lebanon. It's very, very beautiful, very detailed, and would deserve credit on the wall of any worldwide museum, I believe. Next. Also at the same time, in came Professor John Carswell. Some of you saw his exhibition last year with his severe black and white paintings and white figurines. Let's go on to the next. Also, at that time, the multimillionaire Henri Seyrig, who had a great art collection, was there. He liked what was going on, so he opened his house with his wonderful art collection of modern art to AUB staff and students in several occasions. That's him there talking to Aida Marini, and he's standing in front of his Mondrian. He had Mondrians and Dalis and Paul Clays, and so it was a great reference for people to go and see what he had. Next. At the same time, the Sursat Museum started up and started its annual Salon de Temps shows, and you may ask, well, what does this have to do with AUB? Well, they invited Arthur Frick to come and preside over the jury in selecting the paintings. Next. Okay, jumping back to Khalil Salibi, who came over here and took a great success in society portraits, but this is one of his works, and we have it in AUB, in our Salibi gallery. I encourage you all to go there and look. But anybody who knows art will see that actually it's not done in the traditional way. The brushwork and the lighting is much more related to the Impressionists and specifically John Singer Sargent. Let's go on to the next. But he also painted nudes. That is his wife, his American wife, who was very, very beautiful, posed for many of his best pictures, actually. But he was painting nudes at a time when not so many other people were. Next. He had a great influence on local painters, and here we go to a self-portrait of Amr al-Ansi, done in oils. But Amr al-Ansi started as an AUB student majoring in biology, but he got the art bug from all that was going on, and specifically from Khalil Salibi and his art center. And so he turned into a painter of very nice oils, but he's really known mostly for his watercolors, in which he was trying to capture the Lebanese light up in the mountains, and simplified forms of giving us a study of Lebanon. Also, Mustafa Farrukh was doing the same thing. Mustafa Farrukh was around. He started as partly doing cartoons and caricatures, which he did of a number of AUB staff, and we have some of his caricatures of Archie Crawford and some of the other AUB fathers in the library archives. Next. Let's jump to something more modern. This is the work of Hussein al-Madi, as is the next one. And you can see the influence of Alexander Calder and his iron cutouts there in that thing. And I feel like taking you into just giving you a few images of practicing artists who really achieved great respect, but also who taught here at AUB. So, Novikov. Novikov came and he had been trained in the classical modes in the Royal Academy of St. Petersburg before the Russian Revolution, but he loved the Lebanese scene. But contrast with this and its approach to the abstraction of Guvder, who used to paint just up the street on the top floor of Fontana in Abdelaziz. And we were taught also by Salwa Rauda Shair, who specialized in paintings and in sculpture and has just taken quite a success in her 2 exhibitions that were taken over to Paris and to London just last year. Helen Khal, some of you may have been taught by her. She was teaching alongside me in the earlier days. This is one of her things. Yes, next. Farid Haddad, one of our earlier graduates. That's his color field. He did a lot of those, and he was a student of Helen Khal. He's in the States right now. Muhammad Rawas, great technician and a wonderful master of many different styles. So he puts them all together into his eclectic creations. Our own Afaf Zrei, I hope Huda's here. Afaf is here. Okay. Good, good. Okay. And Samir Tabit, who was acting president during the war, that was after he had been chair of the chemistry department. His passion was painting. He studied with Antigone, the famous court painter to Queen Elizabeth. And then, well, I'll finish up with one of my own watercolors. I do the more conventional type of thing. But I just feel like ending with my thesis statement. I hope I've shown you how suddenly, because of what happened at AUB, art flourished into what one critic who came from the States called a multiplicity, a surprising plurality of art making in this particular place. And Lebanon still remains as a great center for art that is being exported to a lot of countries around here and around the region. I'll give this over now to Peter. Peter, it's your turn.
A very hard act to follow. I've been given a few minutes to speak about the theater situation, but then they asked me to speak more about the whole humanities and liberal arts and CS, for you old-timers who were at AUB, speak about that. So in terms of theater, I'm limiting myself to just a few slides to give you a bit of an indication of the situation in theater. Well, first of all, it was very dramatic, very full of life. West Hall stage, the old one, not this new auditorium, the old West Hall stage, for those of you who remember, which at the time was a state-of-the-art theater, was a center for much of what was happening in theater at the time in the 60s. I came in as a freshman in '59. I spent 6 years here. During that period, West Hall was really attracted community theater. This was one very big thing that I think we should and we will regain now with the new president and just the times, hopefully, that will go on. Community theater, meaning we had the AUB Drama Club, We had something called ART, the American Repertory Theatre. We had the Phoenix Players, primarily the British community. But the West Hall drew people from all walks of Lebanon, but particularly, of course, in terms of English theatre, although you had some French plays, you had some Arabic plays. And the excitement of those years was that we actually dreamed, we were naive enough to dream that, Lebanon is just such a natural place for an international center for theatre. You could have theatre in Arabic, English, French, Armenian, at least, those four, and then who knows in the future. So the 60s were a time of great optimism, great hope for the future, infinite perfectibility of man, infinite progress. It was a very naive but wonderful time when people, although there were the sniffings, the beginnings of things that were going to go wrong. There was, of course, the 56 Suez. There was 58, the skirmishes here, which were called the revolution. Now we look back at them and think it was just sort of a pillow fight. And it was really a very, very exciting time. And the first lecture I ever attended was at the Assembly Hall, where we used to have most of our lectures, and it was Jawaharlal Nehru was giving his speech, and it was basically about the whole question, the whole mantra of the end justifies the means, and everybody was using it. Nobody does that anymore now. We've all gone well beyond that. But and he gave a very, for me as a freshman, it was an exciting speech, because it kind of gave me a kind of an orientation that has influenced me all through my life. He was making very simple points, but he made it very, in a very, very wonderful way, that you basically get, you get the bedfellows you sleep with. I mean, if you're using certain means, you're going to wind up with what those means produce. You're not going to have a miracle happen and suddenly everything will change. So be careful of the means that are being used to achieve the end you want to achieve. And so Nehru, why am I mentioning Nehru? Because this was the time of Abdel Nasser, Nehru, Tito, who tried, the three of them were sort of, whether you agreed with their politics or not, that's not the point. I'm trying to draw principles here for, what those times, what they meant for us, was that there was a third way between, America and Russia. Charles Malik, the last time I saw him, or some of the last times I saw him before he died, he'd been to Washington, and he came back and he thought, he said, Peter, but all they're interested in is in defeating each other. They have no notion of of doing something together for the world, so for me at the time as a young student, Abdel Nasser, Tito, and Nehru represented the possibility of somehow bringing things together. Not that they did, but I mean, it was kind of that idea. But the whole theater scene here was dramatic enough and plural enough that we had a community. This is one of the things I wanted to come to. Ras Beirut was kind of like an island in itself, and it continued to be, the AUB continued to be an oasis all during the war. And AUB is really a very unique place. I'm sure you know that, but we're trying to give you today a little bit more of how, of the possibilities that were actualized in the 60s and that are coming back, and we are going to have, hopefully, a return to this. Community. Theater wasn't just a play here or a play there or somebody, making his reputation or something like that. Theater was genuinely the most political of all the arts. It was the political here meaning community, not this way. And so we had, why did I have, can I go back to the first slide, please, of Mother Courage? Way back to the first theater slide. And if you stay there. Yeah, this was Mother Courage, just because I know there are some historians here, and you don't really know what really happened in Lebanon. In 1974, we tried to present Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage at what was BCW then, it's LAU, at the Gulbenkian Theater, because by that time, this kind of auditorium was no longer what you consider a theater. By that time, Gulbenkian Theater up at the LAU was really what theaters were really all about. So we tried doing Mother Courage in 1974, and the events had started, and we weren't able to produce it. But we were in 75. In 1975, we presented Mother Courage, and Mother Courage launched the war in Lebanon. Because those of you who don't know about Bertolt Brecht and Mother Courage, it's all about how making money through religion and war. War, religion will help you have a really interesting war. And what's the whole point of it? Make more money. So we launched, let's have a cheer for that, please. AUBs. Okay, so basically, if we go through these slides again, just, this is Mother Courage up at LAU, Mother Courage again. All right, this is Caucasian Chalk Circle right here. And this is, David Kurani was brilliant in using the old West Hall stage, which had become really restraining. But this is a bridge in Caucasian Chalk Circle. Go on, next, please. Right here on this particular stage, Caucasian Chalk Circle, next. This is the Lyre for Goldoni. Just to give you a bit of we did all kinds of plays in the 60s. But next, please, I don't want to spend too much time because I don't have any more time. Lyre, Flea in Her Ear. But these, we don't really have any exciting shots from that period, unfortunately, that we're able to put on the slide. This is Chekhov. David also had presented that, opening up the stage through those curtains in the back for Wild Honey by a Chekhov play here, something from farces. Next, please, go on. Yeah, okay. Now, this is As You Like It in front of College Hall, a production before the war started, an outdoor production. So once again, we're hoping in the future that outdoor productions will be revived. This is in College Hall, Shakespeare's As You Like It. Next, please. Okay, back to the hall here, and this was a shot of the first open air. We thought we were going to start a tradition of something called Shakespeare on the Oval, and we did two outdoor Shakespeares on the Oval. This was 12th Night, the first one we did. Let's have a next picture so you see at least a little bit of it. Malvolio and Feste and Maria and Sir Toby. This is using Fisk Hall a little bit. We don't have very good pictures, unfortunately, of that period. This is next. This is we also did Midsummer Night's Dream the next year. Next, this is the last one we have. Okay, we don't have very much there. But this was the whole. I was asked to say something about the humanities and GE, CS, CVSP. For those of you who are old timers, as students, it was general education. When I started teaching, it had become cultural studies. Cultural studies came to mean something else in the Anglo-Saxon world. So civilization sequence program, and now civilization studies program. Why am I focusing on this? Why did they ask me to speak about this rather than more on theater? Primarily that this represented at the time a 4-semester program that brought together faculty and students from all over the campus. And it created, again, a sense of community. This is my thesis here. The AUB, the heart of AUB is it was capable in the past of really being the center of a community, genuine interaction. People from all over, people fighting each other, but verbally, not physically, leftists, rightists, everybody was revolutionary. In the religious circles, you had the Vatican Council, and you had liberation theology, and you had all that stuff. So you had, a ferment of revolution at every level. And all of them were represented here at the AUB. And people, coexisted with each other until the gods and the Game of Nations decided that they wanted to take us elsewhere. But we're thinking of 150 years. And so thinking of the next 150 years, I really firmly believe that why this program of 4 semesters, which has been castrated, sorry to use the word, it's now, it isn't that. We are really working to try to recreate or reinvent a program similar to that, up to date now, not just doing exactly the same thing as before. There's no nostalgia or walking down memory lane or going backwards, but taking, seeing how we can once again restore at the heart of the university the liberal arts and the humanities in a way that will draw together people from all over the campus, for one thing, and will be kind of like a lodestone also to motivate others to come back to that kind of a situation which we had in the exciting 60s up to 75 when we launched the war in 75.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, David. And now I would like to invite Mr. Matar to join me at the stage.
Hi, my presentation is called The 70s Revisited, a Personal Account. Ladies and gentlemen, my narrative at best is one of many narratives. It is my personal account of what I was privy to as a student activist and as president of the Student Council in 1974. It is not inclusive, for it is by its very nature exclusive. Let's go back to the early 70s. Those were different times. Lebanon and Arab were different. In Lebanon, the PLO was still there. The Syrian regime was slowly inching into Lebanon. Lebanon was still under Israeli occupation. The civil war was still underway. The Lebanese communities were still lurking against each other. A vibrant civil society fed by liberal education and receptive to outside ideas was emerging as a threat to the traditional communal divide, so felt the ancien regime. An assertive nationalist and leftist movement was quickly gaining grounds, munching on the traditional za'amat. Theater, modern poetry, cafe society, and nightlife recalled the année folle of Paris after the First World War. Migration from the rural areas, in great part due to the skirmishes with PLO forces in the south and Bekaa, and to a lesser degree due to economic hardships, was feeding quickly the poverty belt around Beirut. In short, a social upheaval was in the making. In the Arab world, no single Arab country had signed a peace treaty with Israel. Egypt was still within the Arab fold. The Shah of Iran, that is, was still in power. Oil prices had quadrupled after the 1973 war. Arab regime still wielded an iron grip on their societies. State security apparatuses were gaining grounds at the expense of traditional armies. All looked deceivingly calm and under control. Above all, Palestine was still under occupation. Obviously, in the 70s, we had no laptops, computers were monstrous machines, no cell phones, DNA was not discovered, nor antimatter or dark matter, and cloning. The world was different. In 1974, the Vietnam War was still waging, as did the anti-war movement. The Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall still existed. The Cultural Revolution in China was ravaging the country. The world order was still bipolar. The international regime was still functioning. Brazil still dominated the soccer scene. Woodstock and the hippie culture was upbeat. The Beatles had disbanded, and David Bowie had released Star Oddity, and later on Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. In short, the grand world order was still running, albeit reeling. AUB was different. It was a Lebanese, come Arab, come regional, come international university due to its mix. I believe during my student days, enrollment roughly ran like 60% Lebanese to 40% non-Lebanese, with a substantial Arab, especially Palestinian and Jordanian presence. For that reason, AB was a cauldron that brewed ferment with cultural diversity, ethnic differences, and assorted political shades. We also were different, young, hardy, and earnest. We believed in armed struggle as a means to liberate Palestine, unite the nation, and emancipate the people. We rejected state borders and the legitimacy of the existing regimes, embracing instead revolutionary legitimacy. We conceived education and knowledge not as values per se, but as a vehicle to serve a political end. The issue of cultural colonialism figured high on our agenda. We wanted to challenge the imperialist worldview in favor of a revolutionary one. We were the generation of the Mai 68 student uprising in France, whose slogan was, Soyez réaliste, demandez l'impossible. Be a realist, demand the impossible. Palestine was, to me still is, the rallying cause and the cementing glue of our political activism then. And we tried to harness student demands to that. For reasons, now I come to the strike. For reasons pertaining to cutting the deficit, the AUB administration took a decision to increase the tuition fees by 20%. I'm running, short of time. Do I have some time? We suspected significant wastage and corruption. Any redressment, therefore, should have started there before resorting to fee increase. AUB had the highest tuition of all universities, public and private. The Student Council, therefore, suspected that the administration wanted to change the socio-economic composition of the university, making it an elitist one by excluding the middle class. The Student Council was convened and decided to reject the increase. A General Assembly of the student body followed and voted to sanction the council decisions. Those were the elements of the standoff building to the showdown which happened in March 1974. The students occupied the campus, all the buildings and the gates, in 6 days after the rejection of the administration of our demands. The standoff was deadlocked and lapsed into a battle of wills. Come April, security forces stormed the campus. 61 students were arrested and incarcerated. 103 students were later on fired to disperse all over. I shall be drawing on what preceded, to try to arrive at some quite personal conclusions and lessons. Conventional wisdom goes that the study of the past helps to explain the present. History and historiography, at least, have such claims. I have no issue with that. But for the purposes of this presentation, I argue that the present explains the past as well, at least in the same measure. To that end, let me jot down our outlook then. We rejected state legitimacy as the relic of the colonial Sykes-Picot division of the Arab land, and saw state borders as barriers to a strong and united Arab nation. We wanted to tear them down. We embraced revolutionary legitimacy and armed struggle as a means to liberate Palestine and the Arab people. Revolutionary violence was consecrated, and martyrs were raised to a saintly rank, as obtains now. We idealized the people, yet appointing ourselves as their vanguard, whose ethos and interests we knew better. Education and knowledge for us were not values in themselves, but a vehicle to serve a political end. Issues of identity and minority rights, confessionalism and secularism, Arabism and Islam were relegated to one remedy. Embracing the bigger Arab bond will solve it all. Palestine is to be liberated from the sea to the river. With the benefit of hindsight, let me take some water. With the benefit of hindsight, could anyone of my generation, with a reasonable IQ that is, have foreseen the state of affairs that obtain now in the Lebanon, the Arab states, and the world at large? My answer is no. Will I go the same course if I can go back in time? My answer is most probably yes. But why? Because history only repeats itself to the extent that people in similar or near similar circumstances might act in similar or the same way. But what are the lessons to be drawn? What were the blind spots we failed to see and should have seen, despite our diligence? The blind spots are: we failed to see, first, that experience shows that means deployed to realize ends become more important than the end they were supposed to serve. Living examples range from political parties, institutions, to bureaucracies, NGOs, etc. Second, that we need no heroes. Heroes or messiahs are inspirational, but are also destructive, illusional, and disappointing. What we need is decent leadership that is responsible, accountable, and answerable. That we need more of those ordinary men, quote unquote, that toil silently a lifetime to improve their lives and that of their families and immediate communities. Those are the real heroes. Third, conflicts, history shows, always end in cessation of hostilities. Reason says, why then go get consumed in conflict and not reach out for peaceful solutions? In conflict also, it is quite often that the combatants collude amongst themselves against the common people they claim to be protecting to perpetuate the conflict. This serves to maintain their dominance over their respective followers. Can we say then that conflicts are self-serving, collusional vehicles of adversaries contrived to keep them in power? 4. The workings of the centripetal internal and centrifugal external forces which have ripped our societies apart can only be remedied if the home front is united, which in turn can only be achieved if and when individuals and masses feel secure, protected, and equal under the rule of law. This is also a remedy for the malicious and poisonous deadlock of the counterclaims of minorities and of minorities and majorities. If not remedied, such deadlock presents an invitation for a protracted fratricide. 6. The equation of protection versus liberties or freedoms is inherently fallacious. I borrow from Juvenal, who rightly said, the Roman jurist, who is to guard us from the guards themselves? This is Satires number 6, 347. 7. That justice is supreme. It is the cornerstone for any stable, equitable, moral, and democratic human association. That injustice is real. It has a face. We see it every day in Palestine. The Palestinians under occupation have been stoically living it day in, day out for around 70 years. In contrast, justice is abstract and has no face. It is a pursuit, a continuous and arduous one for all it takes. Therefore, it is worthwhile to embrace justice and defend it. To my mind, Palestine is the painful living embodiment of both. By and large, we did not adequately appreciate that violence as a means towards an end might prove to be self-consuming and reproductive, despite the huge efforts to regulate it under international law. State and non-state violence, non-state actors that is, along with random individual, collective, and confessional violence are rampant worldwide. They pose a huge problem to our very existence and to government and law enforcement agencies. It is tearing our society and states apart. We are looking at it. This does not belie that the lawful use of force is legitimate, especially in self-defense, defense of the fatherland or motherland, and in cases of national liberation. But in the face of the bare, blind, and wanton violence that we are seeing in Syria, Iraq, and other Arab countries, we can only hope or wonder if this insanity will prove its own undoing. Yet, we were right somehow, or at least sensitive and perceptive enough to the inhumane plight of the deprived and the underprivileged. I admit that policies of the left, especially communism, proved wrong, but the issues and causes it embraced were right and still need to be addressed and redressed. Issues like equality, redistribution of wealth, poverty, education, social security for the needy, fighting corruption and colonialism, curbing pollution, saving the ecology, defending human rights and liberties and freedoms, etc. Conversely, I argue that capitalism failed to address these huge problems. In fact, they exacerbated since the fall of the left, and the gap between the rich and the poor is bigger than ever before and is still increasing. Capitalism with a human face is nowhere near. Many believe it is mutually exclusive and or contradiction in terms. We have come now to realize how important state borders are. Erasing borders by force invites chaos and carnage, as we see around us. It is quite ironic that the demise of the state borders in the Arab world have succeeded in reinstating them in the West, especially in the European Union. It seems that only in the pursuit of knowledge, scientific research, and technology can transcend borders. I look at AUB, I'm almost finished. I look at AUB as a space-time capsule within which exists the cumulus of the life experiences, knowledge, emotional charges, ideas, failures, and achievements acquired and transmitted from one generation to another over the past 150 years. My generation is only one ring in that chain. For good or bad, we tried but failed. For indeed, our world have collapsed, and Palestine is still occupied with the world at large, and the West in particular, oblivious to the systematic genocide perpetrated by a bigot called Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet. To my mind, AUB is the best American investment in the Middle East. This anomaly only infinitesimally alleviates the excesses of the permanent American scandalous and lopsided policies in support of the Israeli continued occupation of Palestine. The question is, can AUB still help to partially redress this historic sin? It is yet to be seen. More challenging is whether it can remain a safe place for the free and educative flow and exchange of ideas. For some time, AUB has been perceived as detached from its society, the society it was created to serve. Irrespective of how true this is, it remains mandatory on AUB to play a more intelligent, proactive, even an assertive, positive role in its society. An open, liberal, intelligent role as such better serves AUB and its community, if at all, to at least impart reason on the irrational public debate we have to bear every day. It serves to pose the right questions and provide the right answers, and to be part of the corporate culture that all big institutions are now intent on and keen to provide. This makes AUB a caring institution, and I stress caring, as it was always meant to be, not self-serving nor insensitive, but loyal to its traditions and the principles of the founding fathers, its state mission and ideals. AUB should not be a university spending lavishly on the technical and vocational schools to the detriment of the arts and sciences and humanities. The soul and mind of a great university lies in equal measure in the liberal arts and humanities, in philosophy, law, theoretical physics, pure math, in modern arts, classics, languages, and history. Now, I will skip. Do I have more time? No. I'll skip to, well, this is to end. In the use and abuse of history, Nietzsche envies enemies because they have no memory. He suggests that memory, like eating, is necessary for survival, that we need to eat to take the nourishment and sap to flourish. But we also need to dispense with the refuse, for if we don't, it will poison us and kill us. This applies to individual memory in as much as it applies to collective and communal ones. I hope I succeeded in taking the sap and dispensing with the refuse of my experience, and conclude by saying that the differences between the future and the past lay not in it, but in me, in you, in us. For some things are only universal only because they reflect a particular place and time. This is a tribute to AUB. It is as well the story of our generation that at least tried to do something. We are only one trivial though turbulent stream in the huge, deep, and calm river of AUB. Thank you for bearing with me.
So shall we start rounding? We got 4 new admissions overnight.
Sure. What's wrong?
Wow, our cardiology fellow, Carlos, is writing me. Turkish Airlines had to emergency land a plane in Ireland yesterday because of a bomb threat on the plane.
Is he okay? Carlos, our cardiology fellow?
Yeah, it seems he's fine. He says he's okay.
This is true, by the way. It happened yesterday.
It seems he's okay, but we're just going from bad to worse. These are such hard times we're going through. How was it when you were our age?
Actually, I spent most of the Lebanese war as a student of AUB. Gangster in Bolivia. and later when I became a resident at the medical center.
So that must have been horrible. What period was this?
This was actually 1975 to 1985, the first 10 years of the war.
Wow. And was your life ever in danger?
Actually, it was on more than one occasion.
I'm sure that must have been hard, but weren't you supposed to be protected at AUB?
Well, you know, in times of war, nobody can really help in protecting anybody. The impact of the Lebanese war affected everyone. But, you know, the AUB campus and the medical center were just another facet of this Lebanese society going through really very rough times.
I'm sure it must have been very hard working in the emergency room.
Well, actually, I remember an incident in the emergency room which has been engraved in my mind ever since.
When was that?
That was 1982, the summer of 1982, during the Israeli invasion. You were not even born back yet, I think.
No, I wasn't actually. But my parents, they always recall these memories about that unforgettable phase of the war when Israel was constantly bombarding what was then referred to as West Beirut. And how could you come and go? How were you able to commute to work? On foot?
Well, actually, times were pretty chaotic. Many people here in the audience will remember this. But in 1982, things were really pretty bad. There were really no communication, and in fact, it was very difficult for pedestrians to walk and feel safe. So at the beginning of 1982, during the June of 1982, at the beginning of the Israeli invasion, a few of us interns and residents decided to sleep at the hospital. And we made AUB MC, it used to be called the hospital, our permanent home. And we literally resided during the entire summer without once leaving the premises. And things were very chaotic. There was food shortage, and we had to cater primarily to our patients. You know, the logo Patients First was and still is. We wanted to make sure that they were well catered for, and as far as we were concerned, we just wanted to make sure we could survive, and we did the best we could.
So what happened in the emergency room that day?
Well, you know, it was one of those horrible nights when Israel decided to scale up its attacks. And it was, I think, August 15 or 16, I remember that very well, when Sharon was just trying to blow everything under the sun, every street, every corner. And, you know, every one of us, residents and interns working in the emergency room, we were worried about our parents, about our family. We haven't heard from them for quite some time. So with every injured that came to the emergency room, we used to call it emergency room back then, not department, we had to inquire where every person came from, every casualty came from. We had to inquire where the blasts were to see if they were hitting close to our home. Back then, we didn't really know much about our parents and their whereabouts and how they were doing. But at the same time, they were a little bit reassured that we were working at a hospital which supposedly was not to be targeted because it represented an American institution.
I'm sure you were seeing a lot of casualties.
Well, actually, many dead and injured came that night. And you know, gunmen, and again, some of you in the audience will remember this, gunmen were asked to leave their weapons at a checkpoint just outside the emergency room. But there was one fighter who did not want to obey those regulations and stormed in with all his weapons into the emergency room, all the way to our desk. The security people did not resist him and basically stepped aside. And I was the lucky doctor to receive him.
Was he injured?
Actually, he was not injured, so that's why he came to the medicine section of the emergency room, bypassing the surgery where all the casualties were. He had high-grade fever, he had a severe cough. He was delirious, I remember that very well, from the high-grade fever. And also, he looked very tired, exhausted, and even scared. He had spent 2 days and 2 nights in the trenches without sleeping and without food. I examined him, and I ordered some blood tests and a chest x-ray. And he was escorted to this radiology section immediately adjacent to us to have his chest x-ray done. But I didn't like the quality of the chest x-ray, so I sent him back to have it repeated.
That's such a Ghazal thing to do. I mean, just give him antibiotics and send him back home.
Yeah, I know. This was the dumbest thing I have done in my entire life. I sent him back to do a chest x-ray rather than give him antibiotic and send him where he came from. So, you know, what happened was that this was a very busy night, many casualties. The radiology section was swamped, the technician was really swamped. So he had to go and wait there. And in the meantime, I went to examine another patient in a cubicle. And then I heard some roaring scream coming out from the radiology section. Someone was outraged, and for some reason, I guess it must have been my patient. And in fact, he came rushing out looking for me, his doctor.
And?
Well, the patient I was examining alerted me that there was some outraged person looking for me. So I turned around and I saw him staring me straight in the face. But then he looked away as if he didn't recognize me.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, but he had a hand grenade in his grip, and he had already pulled the pin. And he was just looking for his doctor to throw the hand grenade at him.
But that means he had to toss it somewhere because he had already removed the pin. So he was ready and willing to have an explosion in the emergency room.
Well, exactly. But, you know, since he walked away, didn't really recognize me, we managed to escape. If you remember back then, the emergency room had a window at the street level before it was renovated. So we took off from that street window and helped a few ambulatory patients escape with us. And we crossed the street to the hospital, went up to the 9th floor.
And the grenade, what happened to that?
Well, a couple of minutes later, we heard a loud explosion.
In the emergency room?
Well, it was just outside the emergency room. So when he didn't find us, he just had to release it somewhere, so he tossed it outside the emergency room, and 5 cars actually exploded in flames.
Wow, that's horrible. Was anybody hurt?
No, no one was hurt. That's because, you know, everybody was trying to evade him, and they were frantically running away from him. So that was good.
And were you able to come back and finish your duty in the ER?
Hell no. I didn't. We decided, Nadeem Kenj was the other resident with me, we decided to just close the emergency room for the night while the surgery emergency room kept functioning. And you know, there were many casualties coming in. So I received a call from Dr. Raja Ayyash. Back then he was the director of the emergency room. And he said, never in the history of AUB did the emergency room close.
That's interesting. What did you say? What was your reply?
Well, I said, there is always a first time.
Ragda Jaber and Yusuf Asfour will describe to us the staging of the first outdoors in 1982.
Yeah, I didn't wear glasses back then, for sure. Okay. My colleague Yusuf and I are here on behalf of the group of students who launched the first outdoors in 1982. And by the way, all contributed to this talk, at least the ones we could reach. Let me start by my favorite quote, passed to me by Bassam Nassar, one of our group. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, bloodshed. But they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love, 500 years of democracy and peace, and they produced the cuckoo clock. This is a quote by Orson Welles, the dialogue of his character Harry Lime in The Third Man, 1949. The point I'm trying to make here is not to belittle the Swiss, but to state that turbulent times are not an excuse, and to point out the obvious parallels. We're not in Beirut, in Italy, but we're in Beirut, which I believe is an equally exciting place. There definitely is warfare, terror, mayhem, bloodshed, and plenty of it. Inside AUB then, there was a tense peace that almost seemed surreal. There were no Borheyas, but we have a healthy dose of our own ruling classes. Jmayil, Sham'oun, Jumblat, Birri, Laylets, you name it. And we did not produce the Renaissance, just the outdoors. Well, what do you expect? We never claimed to be Da Vinci's or Michelangelo's. We were a group of students with very high aspirations and very low funding. After this much time, what makes outdoors a defining moment for AUB? Why did it last and has become, as I understand, a yearly tradition? My belief is that this event was a game changer, a new idea that combated apathy and provided a platform of expression to a diverse body of students who did not necessarily fit within the status quo at the time. We created an all-inclusive forum that has persisted despite adversity then and since.
Our proposition was simple. We wanted to engage students in activities that made a difference and meant something to them. We believed that singing and dancing, painting and writing and acting and all the things in between, and including, yes, a fashion show, all deserved a platform and support as much as all the other so-called lofty causes espoused by the political parties that were forced on us. Remember, this was the late 70s and early 80s, the period that witnessed the decimation of all political causes and the collapse of any pretense that the long Civil War would accomplish anything worthwhile. Student political activism, which, with its lofty ideals and noble intentions described by Mr. Matar, had receded, and lawlessness had taken over, making politics a dirty world. AUB's public space had become gradually divided between the representatives of the various political parties and militias, much as it seems to be the case today. Most of the students had become conduits for one or more of the political parties. The space for non-political expression had shrunk considerably, and those of us who craved for such a space were being pushed out. But instead of buckling to the pressures, we saw this crisis as an opportunity. We got together and invented our own forum, and called the first event Indoors, and followed it with another one called Outdoors. I'm happy to report that this forum has outlasted most of the parties that shooed us away. That is why Outdoors is a game changer. It changed the playing field and found a place for all the students to express themselves. To quote David Thaddeus, one of the creators of Outdoors, we managed to create a dream while living a nightmare, and this dream goes on.
So, in February 1981, under the leadership of our dear friend David Thaddeus, scion of the Photography Club, West Hall became a free-for-all forum of expression. The event was built as an activity of the Yearbook Committee, and it was designed as an inclusive umbrella for all clubs at AUB, those who wanted to participate. Haytham Haddad's poster, A Keyhole Looking In, indicated a surprise in the making. And it was. West Hall stairs were transformed into quadratic surface with ropes tied to balustrade columns. Walls were covered with rolls of paper containing drawings, sketches, and copies of graffiti from all around campus. The idea was to have an event where clubs and individuals at AUB could showcase their talent in one single event, and every room had multiple activities: ballet, music, dancing, fashion show. Some of the clubs did not take it seriously, refused to participate. Some did, and this was a success. We did build it, and people came, lots of them, to enjoy the activities. We were so happy with the turnaround of Indoors that it was natural to conceive of a sequel. So, in 1982, I was the theme editor of the campus yearbook, which put me in the organizing committee of the next Indoors. After a survey of the clubs that could participate, and given the reputation acquired the year before, I told the committee we do not have a space indoors of West Hall. So Basil Flyhan, who was the accountant, immediately said, so we go outdoors. Hence, this star was born, with no funding again, very high hopes, and a very concerted effort by a large number of students, volunteers, and some staff from AUB, namely the security and the cleaning staff.
Our idea was presented as Outdoors 1982, a weekend at AUB. Since there was a war everywhere, we decided to invite everyone to the AUB Oasis for a weekend. We spent a few months preparing for Outdoors 82 and planned to hold it on June 5 and 6 in 1982. Preparations included transforming the campus into a regular neighborhood of Beirut, minus the roadblocks and destruction. We created coffee shops, food and hummus restaurants on the platform of Assembly Hall, a grand stage that showcased AUB bands and a jazz corner by the observatory. Ernest Idris, managed by Samah and Rania Idris. Reem Akra organized her first fashion show on the Oval. And a large number of volunteers labored in the background to make sure all these events happened smoothly. There were fortune tellers, street musicians, painters, and even a beggar, roaming among the public as well. And we even renamed the streets and gave David Thaddeus a square to commemorate his name. A color-coded streetscape was created with colored street center lines to lead people to the different activities. A team of several students, including Judy Makhul, Abdul Halim Jabra, and I, were charged with painting the street center lines from the medical gate all the way to the IC gate. We painted all night, which made some of the lines crooked and gave me a backache I still remember today. We opened the gates to the community at 10 a.m. and charged them a mere 5 Lebanese pounds to enjoy the weekend. We were flooded with people from all over. We held a gala dinner Saturday night at the Garden of Marken House, featuring the election of Miss AUB, the first one since the Civil War. Naila Romanos won the title. Around 120 people, paying guests, attended the gala, and around 200 others climbed trees, walls, and balconies to peacefully watch this event. By midday Sunday, we had raised the equivalent of $20,000, a lot of money for that time.
Yeah, a lot. On that Sunday afternoon, the Israeli invasion started. The Idrises announced quietly that they are wrapping up their event. On the Oval, there was a bigger showdown, as a couple of so-called politically alert and active students grabbed the mic to tell everybody to disperse, that there's a war. We wrapped up things quietly in hopes of avoiding a mad rush, and it went well. But the story did not end here. In a week's time, the Israelis were on the outskirts of Beirut. And for the first time in history, an Arab capital was under siege. Refugees flocked to Beirut and resided in makeshift shelters. In a week's time, however, the singers, dancers, musicians, and models of the outdoors showed up to organize one of the largest relief operations to take place at AUB. We shifted gears almost overnight, from singing, dancing, and playing music to bagging rice, beans, and clothes and other supplies. The effort continued until the ceasefire. We also donated all the proceeds of Outdoors to the Red Cross. Until today, the memory of Outdoors is very closely intertwined in my mind with the memories of bombing and aid and refugees. In 1983, we attempted to stage Outdoors again, this time calling it Crossroads. We had begun to realize that it's a lasting event and wanted to experiment with momentous names. Shireen Ahmedi designed and supervised all of us in painting a large poster the size of the West Hall outside wall. To the surprise of everyone, mostly us, 24 hours before the opening date, the event was canceled by no other than the Army Intelligence Forces at the time. Basil Fleihan, who had become the editor of Campus at the time, summoned to an investigation in Jersey and told that this is a dangerous and subversive event and should not take place because these are dangerous and subversive times. The meeting we held with Basil when he came back from investigation, I remember well. We looked at each other in wonder. We were finally a force to be reckoned with, albeit at the wrong time and for the wrong reasons. We did not know whether to be proud or sad, so we were mostly confused. But these were confusing times. In protest of this decision, we hung the poster on the West Hall wall at night, and we fled. That night, before the morning, the poster was torched, and burn marks were left on the West Hall wall. So, art was being recognized as it should be, a form of rebellion. But our rebellion was being crushed by all the powers that be. Some of us were threatened, others were roughed up. But the irony was amazing. The parties and the military and the intelligence who were engaged in brutal wars with each other outside AUB collaborated inside AUB to shut us up. We concluded that we must be important and scared enough to shut up. To my knowledge, there was an outdoors in 1984, which tried to keep up the idea alive. And I left Lebanon in 85, as most of us did. I returned in 95 to work in a UNDP position under no other than my dear friend Basil Fleihan. He proceeded to tell everyone on our first meeting that I gave him his first ever job as an accountant on the outdoors. That summer, walking through Hamra, I saw an old faded poster announcing Outdoors 95, which was scheduled for June of that year. I was overjoyed. So Outdoors lives on, and long after most of the parties that shooed us off had ceased to exist, we outlasted them. As I was preparing for this talk, I asked my son Cyrus, a student at AUB, if he thought Outdoors deserved to be a defining moment at AUB, and why. Without missing a beat, he said, of course. Not because it's the largest in scope, he said, but because it's one of the few, if not the only, non-sectarian events that includes all. So we won. This is now a legacy, a defining moment. It is the platform was always intended to be, all-inclusive, combating apathy, embracing diversity, and promoting engagement. Irrespective of intolerant ideologies of our time or intolerant sects of this time. We won. I wish Basil was alive to see that we won. I also wish we picked a sexier name. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce Ms. Annie Kasparian, Director of Executive Services for the current president of AUB, as well as the former 10th president.
Good evening. I am highly honored to represent the staff of the American University of Beirut. My name is Annie Kasparian. The staff representative at this great occasion can be any of my colleagues. It could be Zena or Mirvat or even Mahmoud or Sami. Most of you know us by face, seen us around, but our individual identities fade into one nameless mass, polite, smiling, waiting to be of assistance. There are few occasions every year where we receive flowers in appreciation of our work: Secretary's Day, birthdays, and most notably, the Distinguished Service Award Day. Occasionally, there is a memento, sometimes even a cake, and for that we are truly grateful. Well, maybe more support, a day off, or small pay raise is more appropriate. As the program indicates, I have been asked to speak of my experience as a staff member for the past 40 years. Indeed, one cannot run away from her past, let alone this past has been spent at the best university in Lebanon and the region. Definitely, I'm not going to tell you the details of my enjoyable career. However, I should like to stop at what I believed to be some of the defining moments. Yes, I was hired to work at the Department of Bacteriology 40 years ago. It happens that the civil war of Lebanon started at that time, and I recall vividly when I was kidnapped. Some of you here remember when the Beirut was two Beiruts, East and West. I was kidnapped trying to help an injured friend brought to the AUH. Luckily enough, those in charge of the AUH made it a strong point, that I better be freed, which pleasantly happened. I was transferred to the Faculty of Agriculture, now the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences, as Senior Secretary to the Dean. Apparently, my work, my dedication, which remains until today, impressed the then Dean, who recommended me to be the administrative assistant to the president of the university, President Malcolm Kerr. I was very unfortunate to witness the assassination of President Malcolm Kerr, a true tragedy in the history of the university. This past January 18, the leadership of the university, headed by President Fadlo Rajahouri, observed a minute of silence at his grave. I must add, on a personal note, that I carried the flowers, the white roses, that I handed to President Houri to lay on the grave of our dear late President Malcolm Kerr. Please forgive me for not going into details. The memory hurts so much, and today is a day of celebration of our university's 150 years legacy and the inauguration of Dr. Fadlo Rajahouri as the 16th president of AUB. I am grateful for this university which granted me the ability, the courage to work under difficult circumstances that most of you are aware of. I have humbly served 10 presidents, and I must add, they all valued my service appreciably. Another defining hour in the history of AUB is the destruction of College Hall in November 8, 1991, by a booby-trapped car. Sad as it may be at the time, it has strengthened the faith of the people, particularly the students in AUB. It showed the resilience of this university, which has endured 2 world wars and 2 civil wars. I say the importance of this university because the President of the Republic of Lebanon, His Excellency, the late Elias Harawi, visited the university on that sad day, standing on the rubble of the building, and later was invited to the ceremony of the reopening of the new building that you see now. A big thank you to all AUB staff, faculty, administration, donors, and friends. I do not wish to dwell on the past because we have the present to celebrate and a future to enjoy by dedicating ourselves to this university. Another defining moment is the rising of AUB. I would say the resurrection of AUB after the turmoil that engulfed Lebanon for 15 to 17 years. This resurrection will definitely continue in the pursuit of excellence at AUB under the leadership of our new president. May I repeat that I am here representing the staff of AUB. Who can imagine a university, the best university in the region, without information technology in this world of ours? Who can imagine a huge hospital without nurses, technicians, secretaries, orderlies, and without a director? Is it feasible to have a great university without having hot and cold water, without electricity, maintenance of classrooms, offices, and buildings? Is it imaginable that a great university can function without its finances being in proper order? Who would pay me? Who would pay all other employees of the university? Can you imagine a great university without security? We know how this university was during chaotic times. How can a great university function without human resources? Who would keep this university so clean and tidy every day? Who would beautify the campus with its colorful flowers and green trees? Who would receive the visitors and introduce them to our beautiful campus? We, the staff, have everything to look forward. I hope I did not forget anyone. If I did, please forgive me. You are all important, and without you all, this university would not exist. Some of you may say, where do I cash this check? We have to be patient, and good things must surely come our way. Finally, can you imagine the university without a leader? We are here to salute this leader. His name is Fadlo Rajahouri. I say Raja because I have worked for him when he was acting president of the university. By the way, I also worked for your father-in-law, late Dr. Raja Tannous, in his capacity as acting dean of the Faculty of Agriculture. On behalf of my colleagues As I salute our new leader, I pledge full support of this great mission of his. Mr. President, the staff of AUB is anxious to work for you. Thank you, dear audience, for your presence here today and your support of this great university.
No, that's okay. May I invite Dr. Philip Khoury, Chairman of the Board of Trustees, for a few concluding remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Fadlu, that's going to be a hard act to follow, but you'll do it. I must say, as someone who lived through part of the late 60s and early 70s on this campus, the way it has been brought back, and I don't mean nostalgically, and that's what makes me so happy about what I've heard. You understand this university understands and deals with adversity better than any I have ever heard or read about. And the way our colleagues describe that today, each in their own ways, reminds me of the strengths of the place. The other thing that comes out is it's about diversity with inclusion. It's never been easy, but this university, and our speakers made that clear, has a commitment to it, and I know Fadlu does. But the most important thing I took away is that in spite of all the problems this great, and it is a great institution, has had to combat, fundamentally what this place is all about is creativity. Creative in its abilities to fight all these problems and to try to find solutions for them. We've gone through 150 years. We've heard about 50 of them this morning, and we're going to enter another 150 years. And if I could make a plea, and I'm not really bending down on my knee for this, but great universities have to have great arts, great performing arts, and great visual arts. And the opening session reminded me that that is what's coming next. Among all else, my bet is we're going to see a renewal in these areas that are so crucial to the future of the liberal arts and sciences in a great research university. So on that note, I want to thank all our speakers. Please, a round of applause. And I, on behalf of our committee, invite you to have some coffee outside, and we'll be back in 10 minutes, so drink quickly. Thank you.
Good morning again. I hope you enjoyed the coffee break and the first part of the symposium. My name is Lina Daou. I'm a faculty member, assistant professor at the Alayan School of Business, and I'm going to be the moderator for this second part of the symposium. The second part is titled 2000s and Beyond. So we're going to be talking about the past, but the more recent past. This session is going to be audience-led, which means that it's going to be interactive. We're going to be taking comments and the questions from the audience, while listening first to our speakers and students who will be joining me here on stage. So I just need to, I'm waiting for my mic. No? Okay. Yeah, can we start? Okay. So please, I would like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Samer Frangieh from Political Science and Public Administration, Dr. Muna Fawaz from the Department of Architecture and Design, and Dr. Bana Bashour from the Department of Philosophy. So, Samer, your title here is The Slowing Time on Campus. It's a very interesting title. I'm very keen to hear more about it.
Thank you, Lina. Well, the role of the title is to be a bit intriguing, since I don't think it really points to anything but to the question of temporality in our academic work. And so before starting, I mean, I'd have to say that to speak after the first session where we heard really interesting talk about the history of this university. I mean, it's an honor, it's an intimidating one, yes. But it's also a bit of a puzzling one. These exercises often give the impression that the heydays of any institution of AUB are in the past, and that we, those who have been defined as the present and looking ahead to the future, have very few experiences to share or even to look forward. So it's quite hard to qualify the 2000 as exciting time, to have stories about teaching at gunpoint, at least not for now, but we're coming to that, or even to think of a strike, let alone the longest one. So what we have is issues, and issues do not always make for a very engaging talk. And to make things even worse, I'm not very good with issues, so I already lost a third of my time trying to explain the brief, and an additional 10 seconds explaining my explanation. And so halfway or a third into my intervention, I lost a lot of time. And maybe this is the point of my intervention, that despite the misplaced sense of urgency that surrounds us, we actually do have time, or we have to slow time, hence the intriguing title, at least in our scholarly and university work, if we don't want to be subsumed by or submerged by the surrounding logic, market logic, and other forms of speeding of time. And so what I'm trying to highlight in this 2 to 3 minutes is not simply a romanticization of slowness against the valorization of speed in our age, but to point to one of the defining transformation in the landscape of university, which has been dubbed differently the managerial turn, the rise of the administration at the expense of the faculty, or the corporatization of the university, and which might be, and I'm saying might because it's not yet the case, but we're going there, might be one of the greatest threats facing our craft as educator and researcher. And one of the entry points of this logic into the working of universities has been through the problematization of academic time and its constant attempt to calculate, discipline, and organize the time of academic. And just to give an example of this audit culture, we can think of the countless exercise we do in order to account for our time, from end-of-year report to self-studies to the various acronyms from PLOs, CLOs, ICEs, etc., that try to always make sure that we're using time in the most productive manner. And that also translates into a change of our subjectivity as professors. So we're gradually being turned into busy manager, and our students are turned into impatient customers and try to teach them the value of slow reading in that environment. And the university are turning into administrative machine. And I think that my two colleagues will address different aspects of that transformation. So if I had 2 minutes to highlight one issue of interest, or rather of concern to junior faculty as they look ahead to the future, it might be paradoxically the possibility that we might catch up actually with the latest trend in the management and organization of university. We often complain about the fact that we're peripheral, we're away from where the cutting research edge is being, research is being done, or away from where the center of research is, but this lateness, this distance, can sometimes be a blessing in disguise, and it can give us the time to experiment with different approach, to think differently about our comparative advantage, and to go back to what Mohammed Matar has said, to think of us as a time-space capsule in which we have some leeway from the demand around us. In a way, we are going, I mean, if I have to close on a more positive note, we are going, or we are taking a step in that direction. So for instance, reinstating tenure at a moment where tenure is under attack, or having scholarship for humanities at a moment where the humanities are constantly being defunded, is a step in the right direction, or at least we see it as a step in the right direction. And so maybe at a time when the university is in crisis in the world, AUB has an opportunity to be or to become this space-time capture, kind of a laboratory space in which we can experiment with different approaches or different temporality for scholarly work, and that in a sense require us to embrace our lateness and to take it as one of our advantage to have the time. Actually, we still have the time because we are to some extent a bit late. So turning one of our weaknesses into a potential source of strength. So the intriguing title, a bit meaningless, was about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. Thank you, Sami. So before we turn to the audience, we'd like to hear also from our other two speakers today. Muna, there's a topic that we have discussed and debated a lot in the past few years. It's a very relevant topic, staying relevant in the era of impact factors. So please, if you can share with us your point of view.
Sure, thanks, Lina. So my name is Muna Fawaz, and I teach in research urban planning here in Beirut. This may seem like an oxymoron. I research and teach how to make cities more livable, better adapted to the needs of their dwellers, more responsive to their aspirations. I think about affordable housing. I think about public space. I think about greenery. I think about clean air. I think about making cities more adequate to the needs of people with disabilities. I think about municipalities that are accountable and transparent, that have institutionalized participatory mechanisms where city dwellers can influence how they think their cities should be. I think about all these issues in Beirut. Teaching this material, my credibility rests less on telling my students that yes, this has been achieved elsewhere, than in inspiring them, convincing them that it's possible to use the material they have learned to make a change in the context where they live. I have to inspire them to be creative, to think about how they can make this change. I use my research on slum upgrading, inclusive planning, public space, but also the militarization of the city and the proliferation of security, or again, the destruction of the shared commons, in order to initiate debates and instigate initiatives that work towards in the direction of making things better. Let me show you a few examples. In 2006, when the Israeli airplanes destroyed the southern suburbs of Beirut, with students and colleagues, we worked to create. We organized workshops and worked to create alternative plans that would be more, that would invest in rendering the neighborhood more livable. We produced documents and maps with which we engaged with the local municipality, the political parties, and the dwellers, and we published them eventually into a document that we used to initiate those debates in the Order of Engineers, in the local newspapers, and everywhere. We wanted the neighborhood to be rebuilt better than it had been. A couple of years later, when the political class turned Beirut into a maze of security enclaves, next please, we mapped every single tank, roadblock, and security element in the city. We published this map here in Beirut. We also exhibited it everywhere else. And we used it to get people thinking about what it means for city dwellers to be living in areas of high security, how it changes their experience of being, their experience of the city. Sadly, with all this efforts, things have gone actually worse, not better. More recently, we also work to continue this conversation about public space. We published a couple of months ago an issue with the local As-Safir in which we presented all sorts of initiatives towards public space. We chose not to whine about the fact that Beirut has less than 1 square meter of public space per individual. Rather, we wanted to show that whatever we had of these public spaces, such as streets, actually functioned really well to provide the seed to get people to think about how things indeed can be better on the basis of what we have. I don't have time to explain to you what all these documents are. I just want to say that I strongly believe that this is the work that makes our presence here relevant at AUB. But there is no H-index to measure one's relevance in one's local context. There is no way in which we can measure how our voices are actually coming into students' brains, changing, making ripples to make actually the context where we live, perhaps a couple of decades later, better. To test whether we are indeed relevant in the world in which we live. Academic planning journals provide me with a wonderful space to think about my experiences, often my failures, to learn about experiments that have been done elsewhere, to actually engage scholars in other contexts, but also to rethink critically the frameworks that I use and to be able to come back to Beirut with a different approach. But they are not enough, clearly not sufficient to measure my relevance. As a professor, I find myself caught in the complicated struggle of balancing between the necessity to speak and participate in conferences and publish, conversing with colleagues across the Atlantic, and being relevant in the context where I am. It is a difficult struggle, and what makes it really difficult is the fact that my university has not yet begun to value this role. In this happy anniversary of, in this happy occasion of the 150th anniversary of AUB and the inauguration of a new president, let us take a minute to remember that AUB's value to the world does not only rest on its contributions to the scientific community. It is also important that we remain relevant to the world in which we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Muna. She spoke about, on behalf of many of us here, and we'll get back to you later with some questions. But now, Bana, so you're going to talk to us about culture wars, intellectual and corporate culture wars. Is that on campus, at AUB, or in academia in general?
I would say in academia in general. Okay. But hi, my name is Bana Bashur, and like most of you here, AUB has a very special place in my heart. In fact, actually, quite literally wouldn't exist without AUB. You see, my mother, Palestinian, Jordanian scholar, came to AUB and wouldn't have crossed paths otherwise with my father, who is a Lebanese Syrian political activist. Chances are they wouldn't have crossed paths had it not been for this haven of free thought in the 1960s. Now, my father often teases me about the glory days of AUB and how it must have really gone down to hire me as a professor of philosophy. Some of our older faculty members make similar remarks, but without the humor, right? And to my generation of younger scholars, that sounds kind of like an insult. You know, your predecessors were intellectually much richer than you. But to be honest, they were. But I don't think it's because they were systematically smarter or more hardworking than any of us. I think it's because of this big shift in the culture of the university from the intellectual to the corporate. Now, this is the celebration of AUB's 150th anniversary, and that's something really worth reflecting on. Now, why is this happening? Well, I think this is a global phenomenon. This is not special to AUB. And unfortunately, we tend to adopt a lot of what other prestigious universities do with that, unreflectively and without engaging with the scathing attacks that surround them. So I'll give you a bunch of examples. This big explosion of administrative layers, the constant spike in student tuition fees, allowing only the rich to access education, and the resultant consumer culture within the students. Now, of these last, I have a ton of examples from my time as a freshman advisor. And freshmen are great because they're very transparent, they're not self-conscious, they say whatever comes to mind. And for me, that really reflects a lot about the student culture. And so, when they're selecting their majors, they think of it in the following way, as though it's a technical school where they come, they learn a specific skill, they go, they land a job, and that's what higher education is about. And if you think of higher education the same way, then our problem is much bigger than we thought. Now, Samer spoke about the commodification of time. That's another example. Muna about this sort of rising focus on impact factors. Both of those are examples of how this quantifying outcomes in both research and teaching is really helping with the downfall of the culture of this institution. Now, I'll make one remark about teaching, and which is a way the university has chosen to cut cost, by prioritizing budgetary and governance concerns over educational ones. And this is by, having bigger classrooms that hold hundreds of students. Now, in this day and age, this is the information age, and we all know that education isn't about just passing on information. Really, all of us can go online and download courses about really anything from some of the most prestigious universities. So having a lecture where the professor comes in with hundreds of students and just disseminates information, that doesn't achieve the goal of educating. We're supposed to be, engaging the students critically, culturally, morally, to really give them a chance to become genuine good citizens of the world. Now, I'll end with some anecdotal points. When I was an undergraduate in the 1990s, sort of the halfway mark between the 60s, my parents' days, and today, my friends and I used to loiter around the Green Oval and just hang around there and have really heated but very childish conversations about existentialism, the existence of God, and all of these philosophical issues. And we'd look over at the benches and see our professors sitting there and doing the more mature version of that, each of them talking about the latest book they'd read or the latest article they were writing. Now, I'm happy to say that when I'm running from one meeting to another right now, I look at the Oval and I see our students are still engaged in the same activities. But unfortunately, when I look at the benches that were formerly occupied by the professors, they're empty. And when professors, by chance, meet each other in the hallway, those busy professors end up talking about this or that administrative issue. I really hope that one day we can be back on those benches, talking about the latest in philosophy, mathematics, physics, psychology, and really all disciplines. Excellence starts with a rich intellectual community, and we have the ingredients, so let's make one. Thank you.
Thank you, Bana. Three very interesting ideas and talks. I would like to turn to our audience for any comments or questions, if anyone would like to share with us or with the speakers, or even to our speakers if you have anything to comment or share. I learned this trick. I use it a lot with my students. I keep on standing with a big smile and staring until someone feels the awkwardness and raises their hand. So I hope it will work with you now. Yeah. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Randa Tommy. I was just interested with the professor of urban development because I've been here only a few days, and I was wondering on my own, actually even yesterday, if there is any in this city with all these tall buildings, very tiny little streets. Is there on the national level, is there a department or a ministry of some sort? Is somebody thinking about it?
Well, you are right. Beirut's planning unit is dysfunctional. The city does not have the very normal position that any city would have, which is like a chief city planner. We do have planning agencies that are obviously not as successful as they should be, but at the local level especially, this position of the chief city planner and her team is not there.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hello, I'm Charles Laubach. In the spirit of rhetorical questions, I have a question for you, Benna. This careerism among students isn't new, is it? I mean, weren't they the same way back in the 70s and the 60s and 50s? What's the point of college if I can't get a job afterwards? Weren't kids always like that? Don't their parents encourage it? Don't their secondary schools encourage it? I don't think it's a new phenomenon here in Beirut in the year 2016.
No, I don't think it's a new phenomenon. You're right. I don't know what it was like in the 60s and the 70s because I wasn't born. But it is still dangerous, right? Even if it's something that's been eternal, right? I don't necessarily think that, I mean, of course I don't think that students should come here and not ever get a job afterwards or not plan on getting a job afterwards. But you see, careers and jobs, the real jobs that are out there are actually much more than we think they are, right? There's so many job descriptions that our students and even we don't have no idea what they are, right? What we're supposed to do with the higher education, with this understanding, this kind of critical engagement that we give them, is we're supposed to give them these tools to be moral, good, critical thinkers. And that should enable them to do well afterwards, regardless of the specific track that they selected. You see, one of the big problems is that they think that their careers are linear, right? I do a degree in engineering, I end up working in engineering, I spent my life as an engineering. That's not really the reality of things. There's a very interesting book on the chaos theory of careers, actually. And this idea that people have where they know ahead of time what they're going to end up doing, like while in college or before college, it's just a very mistaken idea. Like statistically, it's very mistaken. And so I would urge or encourage parents, faculty members, or students themselves to think of this as just a one stop along their careers, not the shaping of the rest of their careers. And that was the idea. But yeah, I don't think it's a new thing, absolutely.
Any other comments or questions? Yes? Yes, please go ahead.
Just to add a bit to what Bana has said, is obviously there is a trend, at least, or there is a constant phenomenon at least in Lebanon. Advising for students isn't always, doesn't allow them always to explore. I mean, we tend to think of engineering, medicine, business, and probably that's it. And if you're doing a BA in history or philosophy or even political science, parents and school tend to think that this is a dead end. And obviously this has always been the case, but I think there is a slight difference now. I mean, when we think about tuitions, and the increase in tuition, it becomes much harder to think of doing a BA in history when you might incur debt that can barely be repaid with a BA in history, even though I think that you have the same chances of getting a job later on, but this is not the impression. And so I think there is a slight difference between the 60s and 70s and now, and that has to do not only with AUB, but also with the transformation of the labor market and the transformation of the way through which we fund our school years or our university. So I think there is a constant factor here, or there is a structural factor, but there is also a transformation that we need to look at. And obviously, Lebanon isn't the worst case scenario. I mean, we are hinting at a possible transformation rather than describing a reality. But to be able to have that in mind allows us at least to think of possible way to deal with it later on. Thanks.
Yes. We have a question here. Oh, sorry. Yes, we'll take a question there and then we'll come back to you.
I'm Rosemary Bustani. I'm at the medical center, and I don't think the outlook is this bleak. You must have noticed students over the last 3 years at AUB are engaged in a lot of NGOs and activities. My cousin's daughter went and taught English in some remote area of Madagascar. This was not existent. And I think the difference between the movement now and the movement then is that there's no violence associated with it, so you're not aware of it. But there is a very healthy social awakening amongst the youth at AUB.
Good morning all. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the wonderful, stimulating presentations. My name is Ghalib Dao. I'm sort of become living all over the place, but it's so refreshing to hear this discussion. I wanted to first comment on your comment about the tuition and the price of education. And what is the price of ignorance? Because that's priceless, really. It puts it in context. But really, the value of that money has not changed. I remember my father, way back in the late 60s, early 70s, we were having a discussion whether we should pay for my other brothers full tuition in Shweifat High School, which is a private school, or buy Volkswagen, because that was the same price. So if you think of it these ways, it's still about the price of a car per year. It doesn't change much. But anyway, my question was, again, to build on Dr. Bustani's comment, the value of, the outlook is not really that bleak. In fact, I think you are far more empowered to do much more than what these old professors used to sit on these benches and discuss old books, among other their marital problems or whatever else they were talking about. And I think you have the tools to do that, because those days, as one of the previous speakers this morning said, there were no cell phones, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was nothing like that. And I think these are very powerful tools. And the media that you have nowadays, it has a global reach. In fact, whenever I go to AUB pages or any other university pages and I hear the discussions, I learn quite a few things every single day. So where do you see the value of social media, of the new technologies and moving onward in reshaping the intellectual endowment of AUB students in the next 150, or maybe, we cannot say next 150 because we don't know about the next 50 or 5. Where do you see that being able to be used?
Go ahead, Samit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it is not as bleak, of course. I mean, part of the looking ahead toward the future is in a way to identify some of the possible threat, danger. I'm usually a bleak person, and I would kind of say it is a bit bleak, having nothing to do with AUB, but we are in a bleak time in the Arab world, especially in Lebanon, and obviously it's quite paradoxical that we're saying it's not that bleak, and we just had the presentation about the civil war and hospital at gunpoint. Obviously we're not there, and this is not the comparison we're making, but we are a generation that came to age after the war, and so in a way we're building on what we know. And what we know, for me at least, part of what AUB represented as a student, because I was a student at AUB, I'm going to say something very cheesy here, but cheesy sometimes it's true, has nothing to do with the courses I took. It has a lot to do with what AUB represented in the 1990s for me, which was the first time I actually came across a vast literature, knowledge of cinema, meeting professors, and most of them were not my professor. Actually, none of them were my professor, the interesting one, and that has to do with my advising, and I didn't know how to choose my courses. But what I remember from this year were really that intellectual environment. I'm not so sure that I am providing that to my student now because of the change that we're mentioning. Part of it has to do with the fact that students are not as dependent as they were on the physical space of AUB due to the presence of social media. And I noticed that in my teaching, that there are certain things you don't need to give students anymore. They have access to all of these information that usually were our responsibilities. And I mean, when you ask a question in the class, in a 2 seconds, you have a Wikipedia answering coming from somewhere. And I think that this is a very good development, and we should encourage that. I have no problem. But that should also force us to rethink, what do we add to that environment of information and speed? And for me, what I remember from AUB is that this was 3 years in which I could have time to do certain things which I probably won't do later on in my life. Partly this is why I encourage students to take classes in the humanities, because even if they're not going to work in that field, this is probably the only opportunity they will have in their time to engage with these issues. So again, social media is very important, but there is, let me say it this way, there is some irrelevance to the university that needs to be kept. There is a certain distance that has something productive to give. And for students, this might be the only time they have this. So social media is great, but we're not simply social media. Part of us is also a bit old-fashioned. And that takes me to the benches of Bana, which I think is a very important development. I mean,
and one thing about this great information age is that there's an explosion of knowledge, right? There's all sorts of different sites and different discussions of various things. And that, one of the big problems is for students or for people in general to be able to discern the good quality from the not so good quality. And another problem with this explosion is that people tend to always, and this there's psychology experiments that sort of show that people tend to frequent the website that already agree with them, right? They tend to look at the things that don't challenge them. And I think that is one of the problems. I think it's really important. It's really crucial for it to be used and to be engaged, but carefully and with a lot of guidance.
Thank you again, Bana, Samir, and Muna for joining us and for the very, very interesting talks and questions. We can take one more question. Yeah. Okay, so this is the last question we take, and if you have any more,
it's not a question. It's just a comment to Ms. Fawaz. My name is Karam Doumit, and in my scope of work, I deal a lot with the Urban Development Office in Beirut. And I think that they do have quite good engineers and developers and planners and everything. But the problem is with the politicians here, that they don't let them work. And they try to bend things and twist them in such a way to make good things into bad ones. So that's the real problem that we have. But as of quality, I do think we do have good quality engineers there. Thank you.
Thank you again. Please join me in thanking our speakers again. I know many of you will have more questions and comments to share with them. They're going to be joining us for lunch later when we meet downstairs, so please feel free to go and ask them and engage further. But for now, I would like to invite our next three speakers, Dr. Naila Aqil from the Department of Landscape Design and Ecosystem Management, my colleague from the Business School, Dr. Haytham Khouri, and Dr. Evelyn Hitti from the Faculty of Medicine, who's also the chair of the Emergency Medicine Department. So Naila, you're going to be starting with us, and you're going to be talking about campus and the landscape on campus. And I think this is one of the most beautiful things and most valuable things we have at AUB, our campus.
Exactly, and I'm hoping everybody really knows that. And just in case they don't, here are a few more images to remind you a bit of that. So I actually asked a student of mine once to tell me about her favorite spot in AUB. And this is what she showed me. I had not seen this space in AUB, and I don't know if a lot of you have, but I think, unless you're adventurous enough to go beyond the traced path, hidden treasures like these are often forgotten and go unseen. Next, please. These are the landscapes we know of AUB. There are the beautiful trees that surround our also beautiful buildings, and there are the gardens that create memory spaces for us. And really, these are the manicured landscapes and landscapes that are meant to be great most of the time. And these are the landscapes that we pass by every day, and they become part of our daily journey. But, there are also different types of landscapes in AUB, and this is one of them. These are the wilder landscapes, and these are the ones that are really allowed to grow. And they are just as important, as significant, and even more for us and for the ecosystem of AUB and for the sustainability of the campus. And I think we really need to realize that. So I think a lot of us have seen these beautiful images of AUB, aerial photographs. Just recently there was a book, 23 Most Beautiful Universities in the World, and AUB was part of that. And while most universities had photographs of their buildings, AUB actually had photographs of its landscape. And I think this is extremely important. And it's the role of AUB to really preserve that landscape. And I don't mean really preserving a certain tree or a certain garden and really making static what's alive and what's changing. But by preserving, I mean giving the landscape the opportunity to really fill out the role it was made to be. Next. So these are all images that were taken by a student of mine, Mariam Yahya, and they show you what landscape is really about. It's about space, so it's about the dialogue between open space and the buildings. Next. It's about scale, so if you look at these very famous spaces in AUB and look at the landscape around them, they allow the human being to really feel as if their scale and part of nature. Next. They're about views, and I think all of us know the beautiful views we have here on AUB. And also it's about topography, and that's very important. And if we look specifically at that image, you'll start realizing the layers of history of that campus through the topography that it shows you. You have the natural layer, you have the man-made layer, and if you start thinking a bit more, you'll start to understand the stories that came about and that started creating that space. And so in a way, to preserve AUB and to preserve the AUB landscape, we really need to look at all of this pressure that's being put upon us to build new facilities and have new buildings and these spaces that are very important. But start thinking about those in terms of extending outwards. Start thinking of preserving the landscape by starting to look at AUB beyond the formal boundaries of its gates. Let's look at the community AUB has created as well. Let's look at the spaces that surround what we call the gates of AUB and the fences of AUB and really live by them. Let's for a moment forget our beautiful gates. You've seen an image of main gate. This is medical gate, which really starts a bit to blur that sense of boundary. AUB MC's campus is a bit more spread out than the AUB campus. And I think in some way, we complain about the identity, but in another way, it also is serving a much bigger purpose. It's becoming part of the community in a much better way. And by that, it's starting to become much better at being preserved. So there are many efforts that are being made to extend out, but also I think to bring people in, and that's as important. We have our open lectures, we have our exhibitions. We heard earlier about the outdoors event. All of these try to invite the community into AUB, and I think that's extremely important. We have the green field that does that on a weekend. We even have one space that's also as important and even more important, which is the playground. And it's amazing what you see there over the weekends and where people come from to actually come to this playground. And soon you'll hear about a very important initiative called AUB Botanic, and I think really keep an eye open for that one as well. But one space that really is important, and I think is really important to look at, is AUB Beach. And I think the reason for that is we never know, is AUB Beach part of AUB? Is it part of Rayan Nimraisi? Is it part of the Corniche? And I think this is the trick. Everybody has a certain attachment to AUB Beach. Everybody relates to it in a different way, appropriates it in a different way, and have their own stories about it. And I think this is the way to preserve a landscape. So I'm going to leave you with a few images. We might not remove walls or gates tomorrow, but I think, look at that space, and I think that's a space that has changed identities over time. Some of you might know it as Bliss Gate, others might know it as IC Gate. It's an entrance to a school, it has housing along it, it has a bookshop, just like what a community generally does have, what the city has. And I think let's look at these spaces. This is a space of infrastructure. It has long staircases, it has utilities and pipes running along it, but it's also a space of connection. It connects Bliss to the sea, it connects Bliss to the Corniche. And this is one of the most important parts of the AUB landscape. And so can we start thinking about this space as one that is both a space of AUB and a space for the community? And can we just for a moment just imagine what that space can become in the future? And in that, try to think of the landscape of AUB as being, in a way, both for AUB itself, but also for the community in order to preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Haytham is also a big lover of the AUB campus, and I remember having talks, while walking down from Bliss to the business school. It's so worth it to be working at this business school just so that we can see this view and enjoy this landscape while we're heading to work. But Haytham, today your title says that we are all the other.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more.
Well, first, happy 150th AUB. What do I want to celebrate? I want to celebrate the potential of AUB. The potential of AUB as a diverse community. I know it sounds funny to talk about potential in an institution that is already 150 years old and hopefully another 150 if not more, but hear me out. I started as a sophomore psychology major in 1995, and the country had only been a few years out of the civil war. The different parts of Beirut and Lebanon were still starting to cross those invisible lines that defined everybody who they were, what their whole background. And I was enthralled by AUB, I'll be honest, by the idea of a true liberal education, the idea of being free, to think for myself, to be whoever I wanted. And I couldn't wait to get to this campus. Honestly, I've heard it from my parents and their parents, and meet and engage new faculty, as well as students. And a lot of them have become my friends now. And then my first day at AUB happened. I remember it clearly. It was October 5th, 1995. It was a Thursday, and I looked like this. That's me with the red hair and the tie-dyes. This is us running for elections. We were the non-political group at the time, the only one. My first class was Arabic 201. It was at 8 a.m. It may be 9 a.m., but it was that first day of class. And my professor at the time took umbrage with an opinion I had given to a hypothetical situation that he had posed. He was looking to see what our reaction was. And so I gave my answer. And he quickly dismissed it and indirectly insinuated that I was disrespectful for disagreeing with him. And then proceeded to criticize me for looking one like that. Well, I had longer hair at the time, shoulder length, and I liked grunge music. But criticized me for the way I looked, the way I did, and for speaking the way I did. According to him, and this is true, this is almost verbatim, I embodied all the reasons why our society was in trouble. So that was my first lesson at AUB. I was devastated. Luckily, he was not my last professor, and over the next 4 to 5 years, I got to know many more who encouraged me to really do think for myself, to think differently even, and to take risks. I made friends with people at AUB over my years here, and who were very like me. I mean, this is something we do. We like people who are like us. But also, we were also very different from each other, people who were unlike me. We were a post-Civil War group of friends. That was our generation. We were adamant to avoid the mistakes our parents had done. So far, not so great. We came from different backgrounds, and we bonded over our conviction that that really was our strength. We are told AUB is diversity. AUB is about being people from different backgrounds. But diversity in our world today is more than just religion or sex. It is really, diversity is about embracing all sorts. We are embracing diversity as gender, as a skin color, as age, disability, sexual orientation, and social background, and really what is important from within the AUB context, the diversity of thought. The way I see it, if our thoughts are diverse, and if we allow for that diversity to exist and flourish, what we're doing really is we're less likely to shut out the other person. So this is the other in my group. We are all others. We all have our different backgrounds. Research, our area as an organizational psychologist, we know that diversity does make us work harder. It makes us more creative. It encourages thinking of other alternatives, of many alternatives, if you will, even before we actually interact with others. So simply being exposed to different people, or the anticipation that you are going to be meeting, talking, dealing with someone who is different, forces us to be better, to anticipate alternative viewpoints, and to realize that a fair and equitable consensus will take effort to achieve. It's not easy, but the differences are more important. It also, importantly, exposes the unfairness in systems and the discrimination that exists that we don't see or probably can't see because of our own personal backgrounds. We need diversity if we are to change and to grow. On this last point is where I'm most positive and most hopeful. I've spent 12 years so far at AUB, 5 of those as a student and the rest as faculty. And I've been fortunate to meet many colleagues, students, and staff who think the same way, who believe that our strength as a community of AUB will also influence our society, hopefully, and that is diversity. That is our strength. And as Bana, my colleague and misfit from 1995 and onwards, said earlier, we have the ingredients we need to change and grow, so let's get cooking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Haytham. And before we turn to questions and comments from the audience, Evelyn, we've witnessed lots of changes, positive changes at AUB MC in the past few years, and it's only getting better. And you want to talk to us about AUB MC as a platform for impact. So please, from your experience.
So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about my experience coming into AUB. Unlike a lot of the speakers here, I actually did not do my education or any part of my education here. I did undergrad through med school and then an MBA all at Hopkins. And then I worked actually in a private community hospital for 4 years before coming back to academics. So certainly the decision to come to Beirut to begin with, and to AUB in particular, was one that came with a lot of anxiety. about returning to academia, and then about coming to a place where my specialty as an emergency medicine physician is a very young one. Even in the US, emergency medicine is 40 years old, and at AUB in 2007, Dr. Qazi started and established the Department of Emergency Medicine. So when I came in 2009, it was only a couple years old. But I came nevertheless, and after my first shift in the emergency department, I thought it was going well. And my last encounter with a patient who I felt I had a very good rapport with, as I was leaving the room, she asked me, "Doctora, شو اختصاصك? What's your specialty?" And I said, "Emergency medicine." So she looked at me and smiled and said, "عقبال ما تتخرجي ويصير عندك عيادة لحالك." So I knew that there was a long way for the specialty to go. Then the other big challenge was the language. So having spent the majority of my formative years in the US, coming back and speaking Arabic, especially medical Arabic, was a bit of a challenge. So after 2 years of working in the emergency department at AUB, a nurse pulls me aside one day and he says, "Dr. Hitte, it may be better to tell patients that you're going to be doing فحوصات عليهم, not دراسات." So essentially I was telling them I was going to be doing research on them for the past 2 years, and no one bothered to tell me. So, but I really think, in all seriousness, I think the biggest challenge coming from especially a private, very well-oiled hospital to academics was in the introduction to the world of academic committees. So in my interest in operations, I started working on a protocol that I wanted to implement, and I had to channel it and champion it through one committee after another, after another, after another. After 2 years, when we were getting ready to implement the protocol, a new study had come out no longer recommending one of the main drugs that we had on the protocol. So, but I'm still here. And there are many good reasons why I'm still here. So at Hopkins, the Department of Emergency Medicine was established in 1974. 20 years later, the Board of Trustees recognized the specialty and the department. In the past 6 years, we started off with 2 emergency medicine trained faculty. We are now 6. We revamped, with the help of a very visionary dean and very supportive hospital director and chief of staff, we've revamped our operations, and we're up to 53,000 patients. We're the busiest ED in the country. We started an emergency medicine training program in 2012 that just got accredited by ACGMEI. And can we go to the picture, 2 pictures before? One more before, this one. So this summer, we graduated our first homegrown emergency medicine physician, and there are 20 more in the pipeline. Every year we take 5, and I am confident that these are people who are going to go and staff emergency departments across the country and really change the landscape of acute care in our communities. So, of course, well, on a final note, we can go to the final picture. This is our current residents. There are actually 5 more now this year. But on a final note, yesterday while I was working in the emergency department and thinking about 150th and what it meant to be at AUB, a patient walks up to me and says, "Who's the emergency physician on today?" So I think coming to that and having that achievement in just 5 years and changing that culture has been a tremendous experience. And it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at AUB in a place that I think is a magnet for people with a sense of purpose. It happened with a very visionary leadership, a committed leadership, and talented faculty. So emergency medicine has come to Lebanon, and its home is AUB. That's all I have.
Thank you very much to our 3 speakers. I'd like to turn to the audience now and take comments or questions from the audience. I'm going to use the same old trick. It worked the first time. Let's see whether it's going to work this time. Yes, you have a question there or a comment?
Hi, I'm Karen Sukhan from the Environment Lab, and my question is to Haitham. It seems that we have touched a tiny bit on the self-criticism. Do you think AUB at the micro and at the macro level can benefit from an auto-criticism? If yes, should it be monitored, moderated? Should it be done annually? Should it be once every 150 years?
Thank you, sir. Well, I think, can you hear me?
Let me help you. No, I can't hear you.
I think. Hello? Yeah. So I think autocriticism is definitely an important thing. And by no means should it be, I think, put into a process where it's once a year we reflect. I think reflection is something that we should introduce in our lives on an individual level. On a day-to-day basis, we are going through experiences every day with different people, with different things. And if we don't reflect, where is the lesson learned in the end? Where is the improvement? Where would it come from? If I don't sit down and at least self-criticize as a group, I hope it's not the next 150 years when we have this again and then go, okay, what did we do wrong now? Or where do we go from here? It should be something we all do as an exercise, as a challenge, if you will, for each one of us to do for ourselves. That self-reflection. I don't know if I covered everything you asked.
Have a
just a comment on the environment and the importance of it in terms of career choice. I came in here because I had to do engineering because I was very good at math and physics at the IC. But hitting AUB and getting into the climate of AUB allowed me then to move on. Well, I'll do medicine, that's better because I can be a psychiatrist, that's closer to my interests. And then I discovered psychology, so I decided, well, I'll just be a psychotherapist. Then I discovered philosophy, which I thought I would never be interested in, and that took the rest of my life. All the time I was doing theater. The environment of AUB is what will help. So what I was thinking was that we need to publicize this better. We need to help students coming in be told that you don't have to be stuck in what your parents pushed you into. Now, of course, in those days I could do that because tuition was much cheaper, so there were other reasons. But I'm thinking that I don't think we do enough in terms of what was said today in clarifying to new students and then letting it become a part of the culture that there are so many other things you can do and you can survive. Look, I've survived here, didn't do engineering or medicine. So that's I think is just a practical point, unless it's already being done and I'm not seeing it. Okay.
I think that's a. You want to answer?
I'm just going to say something we were actually just discussing right now, young faculty, about when we were in AUB and what we were doing, and we discovered that none of us actually came in doing what we're doing today. So most of us started with one major, shifted to another major, and then today we're doing something we had, we knew nothing about when we were at AUB. And I think that's very important, and I agree that I think, and I'm going back to what Bana was talking about earlier, we need to have the opportunity to tell our students, this is one way of doing this. The best way to do it is, be open to everything that's around you. And there's one lecture that I give to my students before they graduate. And in that lecture, I tell them to do as many mistakes as they can as fast as possible, because actually this is what leads you in the right direction. I mean, you try things out, you do different things, but you have to have the courage to do them and to do them fast, because I think that's the only way to grow. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but in a way, I think talking today and talking to each other, we realized that we are here today, and none of us had imagined we'd be here, 10 years ago.
My name is Abdsalam Haykal. I was a student at AUB between 96 and 2000. I'm one of many people in the room that AUB changed their lives. Listening to all the presentations today, and I think it was an inspiring morning. I feel that there are two time zones. There is a zone in which time travels fast, which is wanting to go to college, wanting to graduate, then find a job, and then move on with life. and there is a zone where time is almost idle. I had the privilege of meeting a person like Konstantin Zrek. We were waiting in line to greet John Waterbury when he became president in 1998, and I asked him, what do we do? I mean, it was looking bleak back then, 98. And I asked him, what do we do? He said, read my book, which was going to appear soon after, Mal Amal. And we live in different contexts also. I mean, the time zones are different and the contexts are different. They might seem parallel, but sometimes they go in opposite directions. And yes, we benefited the region, we benefited Lebanon, we benefited Syria, where I come from, and many people today feel that we are a production line to send graduates to seek opportunities elsewhere. So we're enabling them to become the human beings they want to become, but at the end of the day, they're not finding the opportunity to contribute to their societies. And we live in a nonsensical region. So my question is, do we do, and I mean, it's something that I wanted us to do more when we were students in 1996. The university, as you said, I mean, it was fresh out of civil war. We just restored student elections, the student government. There was activism on campus. And we protested against also tuition fees. And this is one of the areas where time zone, when the time seems idle, because it's still happening. So do we help students? How do we help them, probably more precisely, to make sense of the nonsensical events that are happening around us? How do we bridge the context? How do we bridge these time zones? It is, I think, what AUB would really make a difference in as we bring these students closer to the context in which they're going to operate later on.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment?
Well, it's a comment, not really an answer. This is an answer, I think, much bigger than the few minutes we have here on stage. But what I like to do with my students is to push them to keep engaged, to keep getting involved, to you're asking how do we change this? How do we get them to find? I said, you make your way, figure out what it is that you want, how it is you want to go get it. And then you have to try to make that space for yourself here. As a collective, make sure it's I mean, there are certain guidelines, if you would, that I have on how you treat others, how you think about other people. But otherwise, it is, you have to get engaged, you have to get involved. These aren't going to come to you. So.
I think so I'm going to speak from my experience, but I think for emergency medicine, for example, or medicine in general, the big thing that we are trying to push for is, and this has been a discussion of relevance, so whether it's relevance in terms of projects or relevance in terms of research, which is a big thing, this is I think where a lot of our energy should be going. Local journals, locally funded research. So once that allows you at least to delve into the local problems, and once you delve in, you start the connection. The other that is a lot more logistical, but AUB's affiliate, at least for our graduates, when we're thinking about where are these emergency medicine physicians going to go in a country that still doesn't value the specialty, the affiliations that we are bridging with other hospitals like the Kisrwain Medical Center and opening opportunity for them, that is something that we are actively investing in and putting a lot of effort in to keep our graduates local and keep them within Lebanon in a way that they can live comfortably as well. So we do have a role to play as AUBMC or AUB in general, and we have to think outside the box about how do we help our graduates find opportunities and keep them in Lebanon, not just going out to the region.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. We're going to take the last comment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very
time.
much for a lovely discussion and for a great day. My name is Nabil Kronfol. On a scale of AUB Aging Index, I share with Huda Zrey that we are 9/15, having met 9 presidents. I really would like to comment on Evelyn, on Dr. Hetty's comment, and actually it takes also Muna Fawaz's earlier comment. She mentioned about training emergency physicians and how this is going to have a ripple effect on having physicians staffing other emergency room. And I think this is really a dimension that we ought to stress in the making history. We have focused on making history of AUB itself and what it did within AUB. I think there is a far larger dimension, which is what AUB has helped do in an implicit way. It has changed the society, it has encouraged other organizations to do the same, other universities to flourish, other departments to grow. I think the ripple effect of AUB beyond the walls of AUB is a very important dimension that we ought to stress in these celebrations. And I think President Khoury really mentioned about our being involved more in the Lebanese scene as well as in the region scene. But the involvement need not all be explicit. It can be implicit. For example, and I don't know if he's still here, Ghassan Ahmadi, when he started the family physician, it was also in the same period when, the same modality that Dr. Hatti. There were no family physicians, neither in Lebanon nor in the region. Now you have scores of family physicians that have been trained, and not only that have been trained at AUB, but they have really generated similar programs across the region. So I'd like to mention that there are two dimensions that we need to think, not only about what AUB did, but what AUB encouraged others to do based on on its own success. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Rana wants to say something.
I apologize for not being able to take another question because we're running out of time, and I just got a look from President Khoury that people are getting hungry look. So exactly, and we still have 3 speakers still yet. So I apologize. We can keep it till after, maybe perhaps during lunch we can do that.
Just wanted to say something on the behalf of the alumni, because I think we forget about the alumni, huge community out there. And I came all the way from the US for this, and we make AUB has been, my name is Rana Hajje, I'm coming from Atlanta, and AUB is making history, it's making the present, and it's making the future. And it actually, the one thing, I apologize if I didn't hear all the morning presentations because I was stuck in traffic from Tripoli. But, AUB has instilled also a sense of service, whether you're serving Lebanon, serving the region, or serving the world. This all started at AUB. For me, it changed my life, and it instilled the sense of service, and it continued for life. And I hope that we continue as a university to I didn't even know about the alumni when I was a student. So I hope we continue to strengthen that the students have actually a whole world out there who's willing to help them. We have a very strong alumni community that's very much alive, and it's really they're happy to serve. So anyway, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for our speakers. And I'd like to welcome our last 3 speakers, Dana Abed, who's a BA Media Studies student and the current editor of Outlook. Aysam Kaisi, graduate student, Department of Political Studies and Public Administration. And Mira Haidar, undergraduate student, Department of Architecture and Design. So thank you all for joining. I think we're going to start with Dana. Yeah. So Dana, you want to talk to us about what makes an AUB student great?
Yes, that's true. Hi everyone, my name is Dana Abed. And really, what makes an AUB students great is one word, the opportunities they get. During their 3 to 4 years here on campus, they get to join clubs, AUB elections, Outlook, the campus yearbook, and all those are chances for students to unleash their potential and actually see their efforts come to life on print during the event by winning awards. But Dr. Bana spoke about the transfer from cultural to the corporate, and I'm here to comment on this from a student's perspective. We do have all these chances, but let me ask you one thing. How many students are here with us? Okay, the number is very, very few. So we are at one of the most important celebrations in the history of AUB, and everyone here has been speaking about a school to which we all belong. So I wonder, Where are the students? Which also pushes me to think, where do we stand as a generation? So as I was looking into older Outlook issues, I saw that a few years ago, editors used to receive letters criticizing their point of views and arguing with them. So right now, I wonder every day what happened to the politically and socially active youngster who is soon stepping into the real world and is expected to outshine everyone in the region. And at this point, I feel like we tend to be more receptive than productive as students. I believe with the stress from schoolwork augmenting and the need to find a part-time job, enroll in internships, to perfect that one skill we are learning in our majors, it's making us find no time to engage in activities that go beyond our scope of thinking. We live in a world dominated by competition, and holding a bachelor is sadly no longer enough. We have to fill that CV. This fact makes us alienated from the rest of the society, not aware what's going on in the greater community. It's true that we are the sons and daughters of civil war victims, and our parents either chose to flee the country or to stay here, and both choices were hurtful. We have been told to stay away from politics because it only brings damage, and we have been told to strive for greatness only to make it into the capitalist world dominated by Wall Street. But is our role only to excel in the business world? It is our responsibility as students to break that bubble. Yes, we have to get this 9-to-5 job, but also we have to remember to think for ourselves and critically judge what's happening around us. And to the older generation, please guide us into the activist life. Show us books, tell us stories, and give us bigger and better platforms to express ourselves. And to my fellow colleagues, do you want to start? Read Outlook. I'd like to receive letters to the editor, just like old days.
Thank you, Dana. So, Aysam, you're going to talk to us about politics on AUB campus?
Right, campus student politics mainly. I was a bit involved in campus student politics. I am a bit now. At AUB, student politics mainly involves the dynamics between many student groups, some faculty members, and of course the administration. In order to claim legitimacy, that is to speak on behalf of students, these student groups participate in elections. They compete in elections to gain seats in the various student representative committees. Now, a large portion of these groups are simply an importation of the political forces in the country, but some are independent secular groups, groups which have been founded on this campus and developed within the walls. Now, credit goes to the students themselves for developing these groups, but I believe also to AUB for treating its students as individuals whose rights are protected, AUB citizens, if you will, in a country where citizenship seems to be absent at the moment. But why should students participate in elections if it feels, or at least felt for the last 5-6 years, like the major decisions on campus, including tuition increase, housing costs, and other services prices, do not seem to be in the students' reach. The channel of communication between the student body and the administration was not in the best of shape in the last few years. The channel of communication between the student body and the board of trustees seems only to open slightly whenever there is some kind of problem on campus, as exemplified by the protests against tuition when AUB students basically shut down the university in the spring of 2010 and the spring of 2014. So, looking ahead, looking to the future, why shouldn't student politics at AUB be about formulating a constant and transparent channel between the student body and the board of trustees? Many universities around the world, many top universities, have a student seat on the board of trustees. Why shouldn't AUB lead in this region in this regard, establish this constant and transparent channel, and open up a seat for students on the board of trustees? Thank you.
Very interesting point. Very interesting. We hope to hear from some members of the Board of Trustees later about this point in particular. So now I would like to turn to Mira. Mira, you mentioned here that why AUB needs to change, and many of the other speakers talked about this. So please tell us from your perspective.
Okay, thank you. I could sit here and talk about the greatness of AUB for hours, but I won't. Instead, I would like to take this opportunity to address some things that should change, in my opinion. As a fifth-year architecture student who has been in AUB for the past 5 years, I would like to approach the educational system for the benefit of the student. So first off, we are given political freedom without true political awareness. I am free to vote in the students' election for whoever I want to vote for without necessarily understanding the consequences of my political actions. And I think AUB should offer us as students courses, especially that we are in Lebanon, that mandatory courses that talk about our history, but also about politics and the games of politics. Since college is a preparation for us to be significant individuals in the future, I think that AUB, that we should receive the unbiased, that we should receive from the unbiased university the basic knowledge that we need for to understand our political rights and duties. The second thing I want to stress on today is the list of required courses that we are requested to take as students. There are specific credits that we cannot graduate unless we finish them, which are from social science, natural science, quantitative thoughts, and humanities. And these choices highlight the imbalance in the things we learn, especially that humanities offer a wide variety of courses. Therefore, a student can spend 3 years and more in the university and never take any cultural course and never learn anything about the arts, whether historical or contemporary, or about the theater or music. And this is an essential part of our college experience, to take courses outside of our comfort zone, to be more cultured. So I ask AUB to, instead of focusing only on the sciences, to give the arts an opportunity to be explored by all of its students. And it's really necessary for the students to take these different fields and learn more from these courses. And this is why AUB needs to change the curriculum to give fields such as theater, art, and music, and media the importance it deserves. It also needs to understand our situation in the country and base some of our learning journey on that. And in the process of sculpting us to be the best individuals we can be, I ask AUB to take into considerations some of the things we are saying today to remain the top university in Lebanon for the coming 150 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the interesting talks, and I'd like to turn to the audience now for comments and questions. Yes. Please, if you can use the mic.
Sonia Maicha Atasi, I'm from the Department of English. I was very happy to learn that last year we had 3 new clubs in the humanities. We had the English Student Society, the Gender and Sexuality Club, and the Africa Club. And there might be more clubs that I'm not aware of. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the importance of these clubs in your lives, but also how they could possibly get more support from AUB, from the faculty, from the staff, from the administration. Thank you.
I think student clubs on campus play as big a role as the courses that we take, and shape the individual as much as the courses that we take. And in terms of how AUB can help us, or the administration can help us to develop these clubs, one main issue is open up space for these clubs to have a permanent club room. This is one minor detail that might change a lot. Now, of course, one of the major advantages of AUB is its great campus and that we can have meetings anywhere on campus, but this is something that was available for AUB students 4 or 5 years ago, and just opening up these rooms, which used to be here in West Hall, would change a lot and would make students feel like at least they have a center or a location they can get back to, and where they can meet at any time of the day. So space and having an always available space is something very important.
Dana, would you like to comment on this as well?
Actually, I wanted to comment on one fact. At AUB clubs, although they have a very good mission, a very good a statement to make, but still students are not interested when events are not very fun, let's say. So I think what clubs should do is tend to find what interests the students first and foremost, and then start talking about English literature or gender and sexuality, because you know we live in Lebanon and the stereotypes are huge. That's what clubs need to overcome first. First thing they need to do.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Bassam Nassar. I'm one of those Raghda and Yusuf talked about in their great presentation. Raghda, I wish she had shown the cover of Campus 81, which was drawn by Christine Dabari. Great cover. You should all try to go and find it. It's on the front page is Garden of Eden with the students sitting on a desk, and the back page is bars with the smoke of war. And that's how actually we lived at AUB in the late 70s and early 80s, in a Garden of Eden, sheltered from the war around us. And we became politically apathetic and channeled our energies to arts and culture, like a blind man whose sense of hearing becomes more acute. And unfortunately, I'm still apathetic. I don't believe we can change the surroundings around us, unfortunately. I'm still asking the same questions, and I encourage you, students, to ask the same questions, keep on asking questions, and hopefully as an alumnus, and I think we should encourage alumni to ask questions with the students, and maybe create some kind of cross-pollination, intellectual cross-pollination between alumni and students. Thank you.
Thank you, Bassam. Very nice. I really enjoyed hearing all of you. I'm very happy that activism is alive and well. I would like to respond to what you said and to the comment made by the gentleman in front of me on how can we be more relevant. I'd like to offer just a suggestion to up the liberal art content of all the technical schools. I'm a student of architecture. I studied 5 years. I had 2 electives. And when I took CS, I think it was CS 204, I was told right away that it would not count. So I audited the course. And I think Dr. Shbaya mentioned the fact that the CS is going through a transformation, but I think if you ask all the alumni and take a vote, you would see that there's a twinkle in their eyes when they mention any of the CS courses that they've gone through. So if we're going to change that, so if we're going to change, and I'm all for change, not going back, I think we should we remember that we are essentially a liberal arts college. And if you want to equip people in the graduating from here, technical or non-technical, to be better prepared in a region that's actually going haywire, the best thing you can do is provide a little bit of a grounding on the arts and the liberal thoughts, that then they will make the right choices. Okay, thank you.
You have a, over there, please.
Hello, I'm Kamal Maqdisi. I'm a professor of mathematics. It's funny, what you just said echoes something that I was about to say and amplify on. So one of the things we do face, at least when I informally advise students, I see that students have very rigid programs, or they may have to take a large number of prescribed electives, but after that point, there's almost no scope for experimentation. There's no room to try to take some courses, make mistakes in them, move on from there, have some time to reflect on what they're doing. At this point, I wonder whether, in fact, we shouldn't add a 4th year to arts and sciences students altogether, so that they can take a wider spectrum and really spend some time thinking about the choices they make, what courses they want. Also, advising often suffers from the fact that students never realize that all our requirements are minimum requirements, not maximum requirements. If you're supposed to take 4 courses in the humanities, that's minimum 4. You want to take 6 or 8, you're more than welcome to do so. Similarly, for the people who are a bit complaining about science, there's nothing wrong with science. That's also wonderful. If your requirements as a humanities major to take 2 science courses, that's minimum. You want to take more than that, I encourage it. I encourage a wide variety and diversity of things that students should do. It shouldn't just be a diversity of courses doing more than the minimum there. It can be more than the minimum in a student club, in a part-time job, in volunteering. But I wish our advising could really get that message across and give students time for reflection and for growing as people, in addition to all their more focused learning in the discipline, which you do not want to get rid of either, but you want to supplement it with training people to be complete persons and full functioning, participating citizens. And this is, I think, the real issue of liberal arts. It's not just some areas or some areas, it's the holistic picture of the person. Thanks.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on Professor Maqdisi's intervention. There's a slight difference between the system we have here at AUB and in Lebanon, which is that most students who graduate from a Lebanese system go into AUB and start as sophomores, and they just skip freshman year, which is basically, I think, the year where students can discover, make mistakes with different courses and then move on. So this has a bit to do with the Lebanese system as well.
We have time for 2 more questions.
All of your years.
Okay.
We have a question here, please.
Thank you. I'm Arda Ekmekci. I'm a former student, former faculty member, now dean at a sister institution. I would like just to make maybe a contradictory comment that I wish we would not be all the time relevant, but rather irrelevant, in the sense that we don't want to resemble what's outside the walls. We want the outside to resemble what's inside. And AUB has always been a pioneer. It has set the standards. It has set the values. All over the academic world in Lebanon, you know what they say? If AUB has done it, so can we. If AUB has changed the calendar, so can we. If AUB is doing it this way. So I'd like to see the pioneering sort of initiative at AUB remain the same. What's more, what I heard a few days ago, if AUB can have electronic elections, so can we. So in fact, today, everybody is emulating, and we should not be catering for what is relevant outside the walls. Thank you.
One last comment or question.
Hi, my name is Muhammad Ghutmi. I'm a former student at AUB, graduating from civil engineering. Actually, I think that, as Isam said, clubs play a very important role in shaping the personality of each student at AUB. But I have a question. To which extent, since we're talking about AUB being a pioneer, to which extent is AUB playing an important role in the political awareness for students, where we're seeing that they are still affiliated to political groups? And those political groups, we know their history, and we know that the coalition between leaders is shaping the political system here in Lebanon. To which extent are students being proactive in their thinking, and they have critical thinking in seeing where we are led by those leaders? Thank you.
Well, I understand your point, but I think that AUB is actually different than the politics outside, even though it mirrors sometimes the political parties that are in the country. When I was having a conversation with a few other colleagues from other universities, I figured that AUB is one of the very few universities that actually has a law for elections, and that we are able to debate this law, debating this law and speaking about it. AUB has we elect a huge number of representatives, and other universities elect 1 or 2, and we also have democracy on campus, and that's something that's missing from other universities. Yes, some people are still following the old politics groups, and some people are starting amazing initiatives like the Secular Club. But my point here is, are all students not being critical even when they follow political clubs? I think that the fact that there's almost no violence on campus, and the entire election process happens in a very democratic consensus, if you want, we all can see that AUB students are being critical at that point. Do we need more education? Yes. Do we need more awareness? Yes. But are we reaching places? Are we thinking for ourselves? I think the answer is also yes.
Mira, would you like to comment as well?
Yeah, I wanted to say that was what I was asking for from the university, to give something for the students other than clubs, like a mandatory course that teaches them so that they understand our history, our political history, and the games of politics, so that we know what we are doing, basically.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please welcome, join me in thanking our student speakers. Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I would like to say on behalf of all the speakers that we are extremely honored to have taken part of this event of the 150th celebration and the inauguration of President Fadl Khouri. The first time, the last time I stood on this stage, I was actually acting as a pregnant woman. Today I stand here as a real hungry pregnant woman, and for that I actually invite you to join us for lunch downstairs.